This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people had so much to gain and had such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
now these people are in very high positions, yeah?
Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 37. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we're going to go back into our little Siskel and Ebert chairs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
in the subliminal...
Stotler and Waldorf. Yeah.
We're going to take our seats in the subliminal cinema once again.
Yeah. This is one that I wanted to do for a while. I hope people won't feel like we're doing too many film-focused ones, but we have some, meaty historical ones coming up, and this is one that I think is a very good subject because one of the films I think we're going to talk about in depth today is really one of the seminal texts in American culture and really in global pop culture for understanding the occult and particularly demonic possession. So I think that the influence of it can't really be understated in terms of popularizing the idea of exorcism, of possession, and creating an impression of how those type of things operate in the popular consciousness. So I feel like it really is a very important text in that way. And I think that the person, the director of the film, William Friedkin, is someone whose oeuvre is very interesting, that I think maybe could be grist for a couple of episodes down the line, and this will be our first foray into his work. But I think that particularly through this movie, he's really made an impression on the discourse around some of the topics that we talk about a lot on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you name-checked it there. But yeah, we're going to be talking about William Friedkin's 1973 film, The Exorcist, which was a smash hit when it came out in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think
still
expectations for it
holds
weren't
up.
super high. Yeah, there was a surprise smash. I think people were kind of taken by surprise when they saw the movie, or when the movie was such a success, and people were lining up around the block to see it and things like that. And the whole thing it was really a cultural phenomenon, and people would sell tickets to watch the audience and stuff. There's of course all these urban legends around The Exorcist. Yeah, it's a huge smash.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
and kind of helped kick off the golden years of the 70s New Hollywood era, where you had these very adult movies coming out that dealt with a pretty downer subject matter. Mm-hmm. And of course, Friedkin, he made this movie hot off of the heels of The French Connection in 1971, where I think they won multiple Oscars
won the
for that.
Academy Award. Yeah.
That's right.
I think that's why. He was kind of hot at this time, and I think that's why William Peter Blatty wanted him to do the movie. I think that I actually heard that William Peter Blatty the author of the book The Exorcist, which was itself based on some sort of true story that had been reported involving like a boy who experienced demonic possession. He apparently had offered like all his royalties and all of his profit from the film to William Friedkin if he would let him play the lead role of Damien Karras. But I guess William Friedkin was like, no, I don't see you in that part, so he wouldn't let him do it. So I guess, but I think that his interest in Friedkin was partially due to his having done the French Connection.
And I think that like the French Connection, that the movie The French Connection is based on, I think has even come up tangentially in a lot of our previous episodes. Everything from, I mean, maybe we haven't put too fine a point in it, but everything from like Skull and Bones people during the Cold War being involved, tons of people, with mafia connections that were sort of connected in various ways to the JFK assassination, that had a relationship with the CIA. Those are actually, I believe, like basically some of those are the same mob figures. I think Lucky Luciano was one of them, who basically set up the drug pipeline that was colloquially known as the French Connection, whereby drugs would be shipped from Marseille, heroin particularly, and by the Corsican Mafia, which was protected by the CIA and the STEC after World War II in exchange for working to prevent French communists from bringing the old port of Marseille under their control. So they literally hired like mafia goons to be strikebreakers, to like go down and beat the shit out of French communists that were, organizing strikes and unions and things. And in exchange for doing that, then they were given the blessing of the CIA and French intelligence to smuggle lots of heroin into the East Coast of the United States. And so that's like the subject matter, that's the background of his Oscar-winning smash movie that put Friedkin on the map. And I think that's not a kind of coincidental thing, because something that we will probably we'll probably touch upon some of the other movies in his oeuvre, but there's a funny thing with Friedkin where he's sort of operating in like a Friedkin cinematic, like a paranoid Friedkin cinematic universe. That is, that is. I think that's interesting. With Sorcerer especially, I think that's an interesting way to kind of illustrate it. Is that I think that all that stuff is in a way kind of in the background, even of The Exorcist. Like it's sort of a different movie, but because like. It has a sort of New Hollywood auteur component. You can see some of the themes, like the themes of the other films, like are not really irrelevant. Sorcerer is a really interesting movie. I don't know if this will be the only Sorcerer episode, or if we'll treat like Sorcerer separately, because there's so much going on in that movie in terms of like Nazism in South America, and I think that it's interesting to contextualize Friedkin in terms of New Hollywood through that movie, because that movie like bombed completely and was a huge disappointment on the heels of The Exorcist, like partially because it came out at the same time as Star Wars. Exactly. And like it's kind of in some of the narratives of this is being held up as like kind of a turning point or an inflection point where Hollywood sort of looked at these two movies and was like, all right, I guess Star Wars is the way to go, and not like Sorcerer, this weird kind of obscure, almost European aesthetically kind of movie that deals with these like very dark and kind of inaccessible themes. But the whole idea, even the fact that it was called Sorcerer, was kind of misleading. It's the name of one of the vehicles that features heavily in the film, which is basically about a bunch of desperate people who are all living under false identities in South America, who have to transport like a tub of nitroglycerin like over like extremely dangerous terrain, and like that's kind of to blow up an like a burning oil well that had been blown up by like communist guerrillas or something like that.
And there's all sorts of like ominous stuff involving like the Nazi presence in South America and everything, and lots of allusions to it, which on my rewatch of The Exorcist for this episode we were just talking about before we started recording. There's also like allusions to sort of like Nazi war criminals like hiding in plain sight. So that like
something I had missed. People don't emphasize that as much about The Exorcist, but when we went back and rewatched it, there is a Nazi connection going on.
It's weird. Yeah,
and there are Nazi connections as well to like the actual Friends connection. I'd have to go back and like watch that film to see like how much he puts a point on it. But I guess one of the big figures in it was Henri Lafont, who was one of the heads of the French Gestapo in Vichy France during the German occupation in World War II. So it's like it's going. All these movies somehow were this lurking menace of like post-war Nazis around.
It seemed like
reason.
Something that Friedkin had some kind of fascination with, and that there's like I think that the fact that worked its way into both projects and into various projects is an indication of some kind of interest. And it's interesting. We can talk later how it's kind of portrayed in The Exorcist, but I just wanted to say the very fact that Sorcerer is called Sorcerer. That's the name of one of the trucks in the movie that they use to carry nitroglycerin. But I think there actually had to even be at one point for some screenings, like people were asking for their money back because there wasn't like a sorcerer in it.
They're
people
like, were kind of a little
bit
pissed off. Yeah,
exactly. Like
to
people,
say, this is what you want. You want another spooky kind of religious supernatural horror movie. Well, here, look at this like utterly depressing, anxiety-ridden journey through South America with these like nitroglycerin-filled trucks, and I mean, it's so like it has such a kind of fuck you energy compared to something like Star Wars, which was meant to go down so easy. And it really does represent a weird inflection point. But I mean, I think in general, and I can say about The Exorcist, even though the subject matter of it is like pretty extreme, it just happened to be, maybe it was the Watergate mood at the time. I mean, interestingly, The Exorcist takes place in Georgetown in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
So it's like
unusual.
not. I mean, it's one of the few not political. Not political movies that were set in Washington D.C. and really kind of render it in a beautiful, spooky way.
Yeah, exactly.
Apparently
like that's
not
kind of like part of the exactly. It's part of the background and like the mise en scène that I don't think is irrelevant. We were also talking about in the movie the mother of the possessed girl, Reagan. Her mother is Chris. She is an actress, and she's creating this movie that is described as like the Disney, Walt Disney version of the Ho Chi Minh story, where she's like on campus, like yelling at all these like angry hippies who like are trying to get the military off campus, and she's like, "Come on, you gotta work within the system," and all this stuff. So you can kind of see like in some way that these idea simmering under the surface, like the kind of discontent of the period, like the ennui around Vietnam, like the anger around Vietnam and around Watergate, sort of is in some way perhaps like manifesting in this like horrific event that happens. And I think that's something that it comes back in Rules of Engagement too. But again, like
we can mention that a little later. He's gone on some very interesting twists and turns throughout his Hollywood career, and has produced a couple more baffling films. That I think the biggest example of which is Rules of Engagement from 2000, which was based on a story from former Virginia Senator and Vietnam veteran Jim Webb, who some people might remember from one of the presidential debates in 2016, I think bragging about like sneaking up on a VC soldier and like stabbing him to death or something like that.
Right, that's definitely what I'll always think of whenever I think of Jim Webb for the rest of my life. Like I had awareness of him before, but I
remember when he was a championed as like a blue wave Democrat when he got elected in 2006, and the first time Pelosi kind of took over the House, and like they took back the Senate, and like Jim Webb was kind of seen as this like, hey man, he was Reagan's Secretary of the Navy, like he's he's a war fighter who thinks the war in Iraq is bad, and it's extremely ironic that he ended up being like a relatively anti-war Democrat in the mid-2000s, given the very predictive programming type story that he had produced by Hollywood a year before 9/11. But we could get to that a little bit later. But back in
I think I even heard that Friedkin actually like campaigned for him in 2020, like, and donated his campaign and like supported his campaign, like, fiercely.
Really?
I mean, he kind of has that same sense of like, 70s like liberal, like kind of like we're anti-war, but we're not like, sissies. Type of like masculinity, he was like, yes, I'm liberal, but I choked a VC soldier to death with my bare hands or something, or whatever.
That's the kind of thing that would appeal. Kind of like how, Francis Ford Coppola and John Milius were hanging out with like Colonel Fred Rexer, who was like bragging about like decapitating people and like torturing them in the Phoenix program and like brandishing guns and like the editing suite, and they just thought that was like fucking badass, exactly. And that guy didn't even really see that he was participating in like an anti-war movie, but just about more like, I want to show you what it's really like, and I think in his mind is like, then when you see what it's really like, you're gonna understand why I was such a murderous psycho in Vietnam. Like,
right.
But like there's a weird kind of like liminal space where those types of people could kind of like coexist in the 70s, and it was like it was just kind of a fascinating vibe. I mean, some of these people, they were kind of like rich liberals, but they would like casually want to like hang out and party with like Huey Newton and stuff, like which who knows, could have been an op in its own way, like, hey, Jane Fonda, like go seduce Huey Newton, or something like that. But there's a lot of weird things going on in LA in the 70s, but there was a kind of openness to like overturn the rocks of like America and just create this kind of ambiance of corruption and paranoia. And of course, this movie came out, it's a movie set in Washington, D.C., kind of about like an unexplainable kind of almost conspiratorial series of crimes that are happening. And I think that must have spoken to people on a very elemental level, that there are like these darker forces lurking. And Hollywood was like able to not only allow the kind of depiction of that, but was like, there's a lot of different reasons you could like chalk it up to, that this was just kind of the thing that was happening to make money at the time. But there was a good about a decade where directors were allowed to paint in both these like very personal colors and kind of casually work in a little more like socially conscious kind of content and kind of editorialize and things like that. But it's very different. I just want to like, slide in, and it's like so different from today with like something, we were just talking about like Watchmen and like other things that have this ambition to be political or give social commentary. Like the way in which Friedkin was doing it, and it's not to say like, oh yeah, that's what, it's not necessarily what his goal was, but like even incidentally, I feel like he gives a much more rich and interesting atmosphere of like 1973 and kind of the attitudes of people then, and a little more of like an oppositional kind of frame for the whole story that doesn't like overdose on like being a PSA about anything. It's like it's above that. Like I think Friedkin probably would say that. I mean, he's making fun of the director who's making a sentimental political film that is really just like radical liberal reformism or whatever. It's called like Crash Course. And it's also obviously, and this comes back in a few ways during the story, the director character who Ellen Burstyn's character Chris is kind of casually dating, he looks almost exactly like in his dress and appearance and style like Roman Polanski. So there's even that kind of a little bit of a nod made to, and of course this is a story about like the devil and demonic possessions. So there's a little like kind of haha thing going on there. But then, this guy, spoiler alerts begin now. This guy ends up dead in like a fucked up way. And, it's interesting to think about like, what happened to Roman Polanski and what happened to his wife, and the, making a satanic movie and then maybe being involved with like Satanists and all kinds of sketchy things, around all that. And so it's like even that. So I feel like, Friedkin is operating on like on a deeper, more paranoid level, but one that really works. it hits.
He has like a documentary. I think his like earlier work was in like the documentary genre, and he has like kind of a documentarian sensibility and like just like a kind of subtlety that, again, like the the kind of battle lines hadn't been drawn in what I guess eventually kind of became like a complete blowout. Like it was still that time of great opportunity, I guess. It was before, Star Wars and even Jaws, I think, started to really cement everything. I think this was even before Jaws. Roy Schneider would eventually also be in Sorcerer, which is interesting, but...
That's true. He would after Jaws. Yeah. I think Jaws is 75, so yeah.
Yeah, it was after Jaws, definitely. But, it was before the sort of, that had kind of taken shape in a way. There's a greater subtlety. Yeah, like if it were made today, it would be like, there's all sorts of demons out there, Father Karras. Like, there's racism, there's, that's like exactly like,
there's COVID. Yeah,
exactly. Like, and there would be like, it would be completely, well, for one, also, like, another great thing about the movie is that, like, most, like, the possession stuff and the exorcism, like, is not until, like, the very, very end. And most of it is, like, this very ominous kind of build-up. I guess there is some kind of, like, crazy stuff, like the crawling on the stairs part, and so, like, a lot of...
spitting up pea soup kind of thing.
Yeah, that happens, like, I guess, like, when Karras, like, comes in. But there is, like, a very, very sort of slow, ominous build-up. And like, it's not like right out the gate, like there's, demons jumping around, and that's definitely what would happen. And there would also be like some aspect where like the demons were good, probably. I don't know, like it would be like some kind, and there would be like a franchise aspect to it where like, they would be trying to, and like it would just never, I guess it is based on an IP on a book, so like maybe it would get made, but I feel like if it weren't like, I feel like that Marvel has characters that are exorcists, so I feel like that would be more likely to be made.
Yeah, like... I mean, I could see definitely, like a Blumhouse movie. I mean, I think there have been. I think probably half of Blumhouse movies probably owe a lot of their DNA to The Exorcist. But I think usually they're more kind of reliant on CGI jump scares and just like grim, dark aesthetics, and they just, they don't have... This movie takes itself seriously as a drama, kind of. Like, it doesn't adhere
it's
strictly...
It's definitely not self-conceived as a genre piece. It's seen as, like, I think Friedkin, like, even said that he sees it as, like, a movie about, like, the mysteries of faith or whatever. And I think that Sorcerer is similar in that... And I think that's why the name, in a way, actually is appropriate, because it deals with kind of the same themes around, I guess, fate and the capriciousness of it, and the the hidden hand in the universe and these type of things.
Exactly, the vast dark forces kind of beyond your comprehension that are that are kind of guiding you at every moment, which is a heady thing for a Hollywood director to be obsessed with, because they're in the business of manufacturing dreams and have all kinds of pressures on them. And, I think while Friedkin was probably very lucky to be able to enter into the industry when he did, those doors kind of started to slam shut by like the end of the 70s. Yeah. He was able to still kind of like, he's enough of a stylist that I think he was able to still have a career. But, not everybody, I think the windows are much more narrow today to do something. Or it would be, honestly, it would just be like kind of ghettoized to like an A24 category. Like Ari Aster gets to be William Friedkin today, and that's kind of like it. You know what I mean? Like, you're allowed to have kind of like one in the kind of the art house space. But the idea of like a huge blockbuster, like it's the #1 movie, is now something, you're right. Like if it was going to be made on that scale, it would be like a Warner Brothers or a Marvel kind of franchise spin-off or something like that. And it might deal
Ari
with
Aster, like... Yeah, he's even built up some cachet that he could maybe jump to something else, but, he is still in a way very pigeonholed into a very specific type of movie. He
That's
does
true.
Like sort of horror movies about like, that he has a very particular sort of genre style. Not that I don't love his movies. I think Hereditary is great and probably one of the great possession movies, like up there with The Exorcist, but and Midsommar is good as well. But yeah, I think that it would be very different. It's a very different trajectory to go from The French Connection to The Exorcist to Sorcerer. it has a different kind of sensibility and like definitely a different type of.
Not to mention, like and then Cruising after that, another one which we'll maybe bring up a little later because it has an actual homicidal connection to The Exorcist.
That's a crazy link.
So it's just being able to kind of like being inspired because one of the bit players in your previous blockbuster movie actually ended up being like a serial killer in like the New York underground gay leather scene, which then inspires you to make like a thriller about the underground gay leather scene and like Al Pacino going undercover in like chaps to like hunt a serial killer and like deal with the sexual confusion is like that is I'm here for that, generally speaking. I think that's great, but nowadays it's got to be much more mediated by like what's the IP? Like, are you going to do a franchise? And if you get pigeonholed into doing one type of movie, you're most of the time going to be, unless you have a really successful breakthrough, like say Jordan Peele had with Get Out, where he went from being like a comedy guy to now he's kind of like the woke horror with a bend of comedy. Like he's built this little space, this lane for himself, and now he's allowed to do like a million things, but still in that lane. And like you can't pivot around because so much in Hollywood is based upon like what you've done before. That's kind of the only proof of like your abilities, or that people will put up money for, is like, oh, you did this thing, so then it's logical that you go on to do a franchise that's like in the same lane. And then so it makes it a little tougher to have like a really eclectic filmography.
Yeah, you know what it is? I think like this might just be a restatement, perhaps a crystallization of what I said before, which is that they're like in, for instance, Jordan Peele's movies, the like a supernatural or like frightful or like monstrous element is a metaphor, and like the metaphor is very heavy-handed and very obvious. Whereas like in The Exorcist, for instance, it's treated as something that is like actually real. I think that he said like he made the movie as like a believer in demonic possession, and that is a perspective that is not like, the idea of this not as a metaphor, like as something that, might be an expression of other things, but actually like a related phenomenon rather than a metaphor for it, is something that is not really normative any longer in a lot of these like horror films that you see now. There might be like some exceptions, but that's
I don't really I have to confess I really don't watch any of them, like any like the Paranormal Activity or like anything from like the kind of 2000s onward that's like a just, I don't know, like any movie you could kind of think of, like The Haunting of this, or like Annabelle, or like La Llorona, or something. Like it's just like they're all have like the same aesthetic, like kind of like a Ring aesthetic, and like creepy poster, and like a creepy girl who's a ghost who just goes like in a really fake CGI way, just goes like into the camera, and it's like, oh no, it's just like really. And I think in those movies, like they do treat it as it's real, but it almost loses its meaning, because in The Exorcist, part of like what's great about it, I think, is that it treats it as it's real, but also goes through all of like the doubting of it, and doesn't kind of shoot its shot too early and just be like, it's all real, and then have the characters just believing it. She goes through all these like psychiatric examinations and medical things, and she gets hypnotized, and like they go to these doctors, and it's actually only when the doctors say, well, there might be one other solution, and they bring up exorcism. And then even the priest, who's like a trained psychologist, doesn't want anything to do with it and thinks it's ridiculous. And it's like only at the very, very end, you're really like with Father Karras when it kind of dawns on him that like, this, and it's deeply personal because he's having a crisis of faith the entire movie, and kind of, feeling guilty about like his mother who got put in a nursing home, and it feels bad because like as a priest he went off to like live in Washington D.C. and like take a job there, and he doesn't have any money, which like his Greek uncle like sort of insults him a little bit for, and saying like you could have been a doctor but then you could become a priest, and so they don't have any money to like put his mom somewhere else. So it's like a real dramatic arc that this guy goes through, where like even the priest, he's almost the biggest disbeliever in a way, because he doesn't get to see Reagan until later, and he's in this mode of like modern kind of scientific materialist thinking, and like he's not feeling his faith anymore. And so it is like meaningful at the end when, you know, it ends up being real instead of just being like some kind of cartoon bullshit that is meant to like give you a jump scare.
Yeah,
right?
It's an interesting comparison to like the Conjuring movies, which I think you mentioned when you mentioned Annabelle. Like that is like a franchise where, and it is an interesting sort of juxtaposition, because in that movie it has a sort of franchise component where Ed and Lorraine Warren of Amityville Horror fame, which is a movie that really probably wouldn't have been made or as popular if it weren't for The Exorcist. You know, in that series of films, they are kind of like the recurring superheroes, and there's sort of this touchstone of the focus. It's very different, like, type of approach, where I almost don't think that it really has the same thing, where this is, again, there's a documentarian sensibility where there's kind of supposed to be a sense of treating, I think that this is still treated a bit more seriously and with a bit more belief, because I do think the Conjuring movies, in a way, even though they do kind of fictionalize the lives of real people, real paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, it is like a fantasy world, like a Warner Brothers dark universe or whatever, you know, like, exactly. Or something like that, you know, like it's a compartmentalized like world. Like, we're not necessarily meant to accept that the movies of The Conjuring take place in our universe. They take place in the Conjuring universe, where even like, you know, Annabelle, like, you know.
Yeah, even if, as they often do, they market themselves as like based on real events or based on a true story.
Yeah, well, but that's like perfunctory. Like, literally every horror movie now is based on a true events, which I guess, like, you could say about anything that is based on true events. Like, you know, it's
very porous
like
concept.
It's very easy. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, they all take place in, like, you know, there's even like a museum that the Warrens have in their house, which has like all the different paraphernalia, like the Annabelle doll and stuff like that. And it's like, tune in next time for like the movie about like the haunted lamp, or like tune in next time for the movie about the haunted like record player, you know, and like it's always like, oh, can you pick up on the little links, you know? It's the same sort of like, it's really a marvelification of like something that is superficially similar, where they do deal with possession, they do deal with demons, etc.
Well, it doesn't have, because I think what's like undergirding the whole Exorcist is it does take this very, like you said, like documentarian, immediate, like 70s realist auteur approach to like a subject matter that probably wouldn't have been given, you know, I mean, compared to like The French Connection, which is like, it's a cop thriller dealing with, you know, criminal conspiracies and corruption and like very serious topics. And then he goes to like this thing, but he still keeps like the same gritty, like on the ground, like, you know, 70s realist kind of sensibility with it. Like, he doesn't dress it up as like this wacky, I mean, he puts his flourishes on it, but he still does it from a very, you know, from like the same perspective kind of. And so he lends it a lot more, and it's more uncomfortable, because like these two things in a way, maybe like generically in cinema, are kind of like not supposed to be, we don't want our 70s gritty realist conspiracy thrillers to be, you know, mixed up with this woo-woo exorcism, demonic possession stuff. Like, that's for silly horror movies, you know? And so he kind of dared to like combine these two things together, and, you know, it caught fire.
Yeah.
It worked.
I think he even said, like, in making The French Connection, he wanted it to feel like, you know, a camera had just happened to drop in on these real events.
He talked about his DP. I forget the guy's name, but he said that this guy was such an instinctual documentary. Oh yeah, his DP like ran with Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and the rebels in like 1959, and like shot documentary footage of the entire Cuban Revolution. Which is another fascinating thing. I wanted to like read a little more about that guy. So this guy, I forget if he was actually Cuban or not, or like how he ended up in America. But yeah, in the Leap of Faith documentary, there's like archival footage of Fidel and Che and stuff. So this guy like was in, military, guerrilla warfare, like urban revolutionary settings, and that's where he cut his teeth as like an action documentary filmmaker. And William Friedkin said that typically his way of working would be to just completely light the scene, completely set everything up, not let the DP on set at all, and then like right when they were about to record, he would just like bring him in and be like, all right, go for it. And then he would just figure out like the angles intuitively. And I think Friedkin like doesn't believe in like a take two or whatever. He would always be like, no, I'm just gonna do everything in one take. Like, takes are for cowards or whatever. Yes.
He revealed like in one documentary I watched about him, Leap of Faith, was particularly about The Exorcist. He talked about like some of the very like bizarre and extremely questionable techniques that he used in making the movie. Like he would like just fire a gun off to like frighten the actors to get like a real response of fear from them. Like in the scene where like Karras is like in his apartment and his phone rings. And he's like startled by the phone, like what actually he heard, what the actor actually heard was like a gunshot. And in the scene, I guess, where the priest is giving Karras his last rites after he dies, spoiler alert for The Exorcist, he like that guy I guess was a real priest and he couldn't really cry, so William Friedkin just like punched him in the face.
He said like, do you trust me? Do you trust me? And like he's like, I love you, right? And he's like, yeah, Bill. And he's like, and you trust me, right? He's like, sure I do. And then just like smacks him across the face and like shoves him in front of the camera and is like, we're rolling. And I guess that's how he got the guy to like cry at the end. Great. That actor was great though. That real priest. I mean, he was like a real like suave Jesuit. Playing the piano and stuff.
Everything has to do with the mystery of fate or faith. And The Exorcist is about the mystery of faith. I knew exactly how I wanted to make it. I marked up my own copy of the hardcover. I didn't want any backstory, no flashbacks, just a straight-ahead story that was done as realistically as possible. And over the decades, it's been interpreted and reinterpreted. Many people look at the ending of the film as ambiguous. Doesn't appear to have been a problem for the millions of people who've seen the film. They accept what we showed. It asks for a total leap of faith on the part of the audience.
It's definitely well cast, but yes, it definitely has a very different sensibility. One interesting aspect of that, I think, is the opening sequence, which I guess there's been some sort of controversy around. I think that even William Peter Blatty had like talked about cutting it, and I think the studio like didn't really want it or something, because something that's always intrigued me about The Exorcist, because it's such a pivotal movie in, the understanding of the occult and, like, the, American consciousness and, as I said, like, really the global consciousness at this point. And looking at the rest of Friedkin's oeuvre in terms of Sorcerer and, the rules of engagement in particular, it's very interesting to me that, like, the first sound you hear in the movie is the call to prayer.
Right over the title words of The Exorcist. When the title card comes on, you hear, Allahu Akbar right away.
Yeah. I watched like some like the extended director's cut version before this, which I guess maybe has like some different images before that of like the statue of the Virgin Mary. But in that version, at the very end of the movie, you also hear the call to prayer. It was very funny hearing William Friedkin try to do the call to prayer in like a documentary interview with him. 'Cause, he'd be like Allahu Akbar, like no, we don't do it on that syllable. But
he did really travel to, I think, somewhere around Mosul in Iraq to shoot that opening scene though, which is another thing that would not happen today.
No,
I think even with
not.
Netflix money. Some of the things he was able to get them to do, instead of just going out to the Mojave Desert and putting up some fake columns or whatever.
Right.
Feel the real. I mean, he shot
Nineveh.
The Nineveh and
Mosul,
Nebuchadnezzar's.
I think, but it's supposed to be Nineveh. Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar's tomb is in the background of one of the shots.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and I think it's like, again, that's sort of it definitely has a documentary kind of feel, because I think that a lot of what he filmed is just like actual like dudes like around that city, and there's sort of like this very sort of orientalist ambiance at the beginning, the idea that you said like turning over the rocks like of America at the beginning, or earlier, that's literally what happens in the film, where like there's sort of this idol is unearthed, and that's kind of, it's implied that that's what causes this. Somehow halfway around the world there's some kind of connection between these events, and I find the connection between the Middle East and by the quote-unquote Middle East, and by association like with Islam in particular, the you hear the call to prayer, you see Muslims at prayer, I believe, earlier in the movie, I think that kind of that feeds into a lot of what he dealt with later, in particular in the Rules of Engagement, and it's something that I think we see bearing itself out now. Of course, I wouldn't say that he has full responsibility for this, and I think that he was channeling associations that have very, very deep roots, and that have then blossomed further in the future. But the association between this kind of discourse, like whether it's around exorcism or even just around the occult in general, around demonic possession, the association of that with Islam, or maybe even like Islam as a token or a synecdoche of taking religion seriously, like Islam is a serious religion that Christianity in some way, the world of serious religion as the world of Islam, and like if you're taking Catholicism seriously, that's like Islamic in some way, that we kind of see borne out like around 9/11, where it's seen as a sort of spiritual challenge, and we have this whole thing of like being a moderate Muslim, where like if you're not moderate, then like things like that, where and I mean it may very well be true that on the average Muslims don't take their religion maybe more seriously. I don't really know like how you could possibly quantify that, but it's certainly a perception where like in order to deal with this sort of primeval subject, we see Islam being invoked, the idea of God is kind of brought in through the call to prayer right away.
Something foreign and
some
serious.
Like foreign contagion, and like the meddling almost, or the I guess the digging, the Father Marin, Max von Sydow is sort of involved in this somehow. I guess that the icon of Pazuzu, that they sort of that classic shot of him sort of staring across the dunes or the rocks to see that giant idol of Pazuzu, that is like something that they made, I guess, because I read a very interesting line about Pazuzu from an art historian who works on Mesopotamia. She said, normally, Pazuzu is a real demon or being or a real entity, that there actually are sort of representations of, but usually it's very small because it has like an apotropaic effect. There actually is a line in the movie where Father Marin is kind of fondling a tiny head of Pazuzu, and I guess maybe his advisor says something like Shaitan al-Harib Shaitan, like, Satan against Satan. And that's kind of the idea, that it's like a prophylactic demon that will, like, or a gargoyle in a way that will scare away, more evil forces. But the art historian whose idea I read was that, to create a Pazuzu from the Mesopotamian point of view, to create like a Pazuzu figure of that scale as they did for the movie would be very dangerous, because that would sort of invoke him on too great a scale. That's part of the reason why he's so small, maybe to contain his power in order to wield it, but to create him on that scale would be dangerous. Which is interesting in light of, the sort of serial killer that was brought into kind of the orbit of the movie. Or I guess, I'm not sure if he's been confirmed to have been a serial killer, but at least a murderer.
He killed at least one person. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I am just looking at, like, you know, there is a little entry on Wikipedia about Pazuzu, and you're right that, yeah, he was the king of the demons of the wind, and I guess his main purpose was he was invoked in apotropaic amulets, which combat the powers of his rival, the malicious goddess Lamashtu, who is believed to cause harm to mother and child during childbirth. Although Pazuzu is himself considered to be an evil spirit, he drives and frightens away other evil spirits, therefore protecting humans against plagues and misfortunes. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I mean, he seems like a dangerous god, but kind of one that you keep around to protect you from other bad gods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So like a very tenuous alliance right there from the get-go.
Yeah, exactly. Cotton Mather would not approve, you know, going to the devil for help against the devil.
No,
but that's what they
not.
did in Mesopotamia. It was exactly kind of a, detente between these two demonic entities. That they would like harness his power, but part of it is to make him on a small scale because it's the only way that he can kind of be contained and used for that purpose. Because to make him on that large scale would be dangerous. And of course, like the demons kind of indwell these idols, or in a way, the demons are kind of ontologically they are the idols. Like, you know, they inhabit them and in fact like are them, or they manifest like really as being whatever, you know, they're created. So, and that sort of, and, that's a pretty common ancient concept, I guess. That's kind of what I guess the Quraysh believed before Muhammad, a lot of them. And, the Egyptians have similar ideas. So, to create like an idol, that is in a way, that is the entity that kind of alights upon it in a lot of cosmologies, including, I think, the one that is sort of invoked here. Yeah.
I'm looking at there is there in some museum here. In the Louvre, there is a statuette, like you said accurately, a tiny one of Pazuzu that had an inscription on it, and it's from the first millennium BC. And I noticed that it's doing the as above, so below hand thing that Baphomet does, where he's got one arm kind of aimed up and the other one pointed down. And the inscription says, "I am Pazuzu, son of Hanpa, king of the evil spirits of the air, which issues violently from mountains, causing much havoc." Okay. I mean, so a lot of things involving wind, which is kind of maybe the open windows in Reagan's room in The Exorcist, and also the opening scene where Max von Sydow is sort of like facing off against Pazuzu, and there's this great amalgamation.
Yeah,
I thought that was a really, like, from just like a craft standpoint, like a really excellent scene where it's kind of layering in all of these diegetic sounds from the natural world around him, which is basically like a bunch of stray dogs start like viciously fighting with each other very loudly, and then a windstorm suddenly like kicks up, and none of these things like by themselves are supernatural, but the overwhelming way that Friedkin like lays them in, and then like cuts back to like this like zoom in shot of Pazuzu where it's like like this crazy wind and stuff is like absolutely terrifying, and then they're standing on these kind of on these rocks like facing each other, and the wind is like absolutely like blowing all over the place. So I mean, Friedkin definitely had the right idea about Pazuzu. Or I guess the Blatty did, right?
Yeah. I assume that Blatty must have done, and I think that Friedkin was pretty scrupulous, so he must have been curious enough to make sure that he did their research, and I think that they were in very close communication while they were making the movie, and it was Blatty's script and everything. And I mean, Friedkin was a big stickler about having that opening part, so it meant a lot to him, and he understood the importance of it and the significance of having that, which a lot of people even forget about or are sort of confused by when they see the movie, expecting, the classic stuff that we see in like Reagan's bedroom and everything.
You would have thought the opening shot is like the priest with like getting dropped off outside of the house with the lone light.
Yeah, exactly.
And, that's the opening of the movie. But that happens like literally like an hour and a half into it.
Not remotely. I think that there's a lot of like interesting stuff in terms of like the way that it's the sort of subtlety of how these things are, like you said, like the things sort of together on their own maybe wouldn't imply anything, but like in the way that they're combined, they have this sort of eerie sense, but you can't quite pin it down. I appreciate that aspect of the movie because that's something that I think we've kind of talked about a lot in the podcast in terms of like discourses around like evidence and like science, like that's very much like dealt with very heavily like in the film, and there's a great line where Father Karras first comes to sort of talk to Reagan or to Pazuzu, he says like why don't you she's like undo these straps or whatever. It's like, well, if you're really the devil, why don't you make the straps disappear? And she says like, much too vulgar a display of power, Karras. Which is a concept that like we've returned to a lot in terms of talking about like, well, why isn't there any proof of this? Like that's something that's like part and parcel of it, and that's a very old concept that I think he uses like very effectively. Like there's even a scene which is very really I think responds to this kind of approach to things where the drawer next to in Reagan's nightstand next to her bed slides open, and Father Karras says like, did you do that? And she nods and says like, like in Mercedes McCambridge's like horrifying voice, which is another interesting aspect of this. But and he's like, well, do it again, if you did that, do it again. And she just is like, in time, and then like refuses to do it again, refuses to offer the proof or whatever, even though of course everything that is done, like, that they witness is pretty incontrovertible proof of the reality of this. But, in a way, there's still no way to really prove what happened. Like, it avoids that kind of, analysis or that sort of paradigm of understanding.
Which is, it's an interesting and important dynamic whenever we're talking about any kind of, like, occulted power moving around, whether it's, corporeal and human or not, is its desire to remain occulted, and like how its effectiveness is rooted in people not believing it, again, like the cliche, like greatest trick the devil ever pulled, is that nobody believes in him. So there has to be a kind of veil of disbelief in order to maybe, work its way into the cracks there, where people can't handle the idea that it would be real, and almost like but then people think, well, like why isn't there more obvious proof of them doing this? And it's like, well, like why isn't there like a literal picture of like George H.W. Bush like filling his trunk with like kilos of cocaine or something, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, like they're not gonna do that because that undercuts it seems almost too simple. Like that's going to they're not going to make it easy for you, but that I don't know, that's a broad category of just like concealing bad activities, but for some reason we seem to think that if something's like super super bad, then there's going to be like evidence of it everywhere, and it's not going to be ambiguous, and if it's ambiguous, it's probably false. And I think we try to push back on that,
Yeah, there are definitely, especially when you're dealing with like subtle worlds and aspects of like jinn or subtle aspects of reality, like some or sort of miraculous or maybe what you might call psionic activity or things like that. I think that that aspect of subtlety, like there is never going to be the whole idea of like, where's the proof? Like I don't think that's ever truly going to be satisfied. It even tags into our conversation about Bigfoot, perhaps, like this whole like problem, like we just need to get past this because, and like get back to like a paradigm of experience, because that's like, and I think that, I also watched Friedkin's documentary, The Devil and Father Amorth, which is, about, Catholic priest, I guess, who, was at the time of the movie, like, the main exorcist in Rome, the main guy for exorcism in the Vatican. I guess he died shortly after the film was made, but it's sort of, it shows, what's purported to be a real exorcism, and, you can see the woman sort of writhing. There's lots of interesting aspects of this documentary, that, it's hard to say, like, the woman's voice when she's possessed, like, this actually is a great example because it's really ambiguous in a way, because you want to trust, like, why would William Friedkin, like, lie? Why not just not release this movie? The voice is very impressive and very sinister and scary, but it also sounds a lot like an audio chorusing effect. And so you're just like, did you put an audio chorusing effect in this woman's voice to, like, make it sound more demonic? Or, like, so through the medium of film, like, you can't, in a way, you're seeing, like, this, something that's very impressive as proof, but you can't really, you can't really take it at face value because there's always the possibility of manipulation. But in that film, he talks actually to a lot of doctors and psychiatrists, and what even they say is that, regardless of their assessment of the exorcism, a lot of them are just like, well, I can't really say what it is, and they acknowledge that it's not really possible to determine what the nature of it is, but when they encounter this type of thing, a lot of the time they're able to, take a cultural approach to it and, intercept it as and appreciate it as exorcism, or as possession, without, they can do their job without necessarily having to, they say without necessarily having to deal with these ontological claims. I think that might be, like, kind of fraught, but, they do acknowledge that, like, they have to operate at the level of experience where they have to kind of treat this as possession because it's being experienced in that way anyway.
Absolutely.
I do think that the question of the reality of it, like, does have some importance. However, like, even they acknowledge that if they can't answer these sort of evidentiary questions, they can still operate at that experiential level. But, I think that that's something that needs to be kind of, it's very interesting done in the movie. Another interesting thing is the sort of, I read that the test that they do on Reagan, where they, like, put a needle into the back of her skull, like that very kind of graphic scene. Apparently that's was a real procedure at the time, and is according to William Friedkin, has been used as an educational film for radiology technicians.
That's because it was actually real technicians, I think, at NYU Medical Center, who he had gone there for an exhibition. He asked if he could watch one of these procedures, and he watched it, and he was so impressed with the kind of the way that the medical technicians were handling it, that he wanted these exact people to be in his movie and do it. And then, of course, one of those people that has a few lines, what was his name again?
Paul Bateson,
who appears in this very memorable scene, went on a few years later to be a killer, a murderer, in New York City, and actually then became the personal inspiration, like I said earlier, for William Friedkin's 1980 movie Cruising, which was kind of based on a novel, kind of like Cobra, technically based on a novel, but really based on something really deep and personal that had happened. But it's basically there was a novel by Gerald Walker about a serial killer targeting gay men in Manhattan, particularly those associated with the leather scene, and that was that
was assumed to be him. He definitely murdered one guy. At least, it's very well established that he murdered one dude, Addison Verrill. He was a reporter who covered the film industry for Variety. He was beaten and stabbed, but, he wasn't robbed, no evidence of forced entry, etc., etc., eventually it was determined that it was this dude, and he eventually, like there had been kind of serial killings of gay men at the time, and he became to be suspicious of them, and suspected of them, that is. And he, apparently he had kind of boasted of them, I think, in prison or something. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember why, or I had to look up why.
In jail,
but I mean,
he brought it up at his sentencing. Yeah.
Yeah. At the time, according to Wikipedia, at the time of Bateson's arrest, police had also been investigating a series of murders of gay men over the previous 2 years, which they believe were committed by the same person due to similarities in the killings. 6 corpses of men had been found dismembered in bags floating in the Hudson River. None of them had ever been identified, but police traced the clothes on them to shops in Greenwich Village that catered to the gay community. Since bags reportedly had wording on them connected to the NYUMC's neuropsychiatric unit, the dismemberment of the bodies appeared to have been done by someone skilled in using a knife. Investigators began to suggest publicly that Bateson might be a suspect in, as they were officially referred to, the CUPPI killings for circumstances unknown pending police investigation.
Yeah, I'd see the New York Times wrote about this in 1979, and they at his sentencing this was brought up. It says, Paul Bateson, the convicted murderer of Addison Verrill, was sentenced yesterday to 20 years to life, and the prosecutor in the case told the judge that Mr. Bateson had boasted to an acquaintance that Mr. Bateson had also killed other men. According to the prosecutor, William Hoyt, the 37-year-old Mr. Bateson told the acquaintance, Richard Ryan, who had been a witness at the trial, that he liked to kill, and he had dismembered the bodies of an unspecified number of victims, stuffed them into garbage bags, and dumped them into the Hudson River. And asking Justice Goldman for the maximum sentence, Mr. Hoyt, the prosecutor, said of Mr. Bateson, he is a psychopath. As to the identities of other possible victims, Mr. Hoyt said he had no evidence. Among unsolved murders where bodies were found disposed in the fashion reportedly described by Mr. Bateson are 6 cases in which the police suspect the victims were homosexuals. The mutilated bodies, all unidentified, were found during the last 2 years in the Hudson River, and the police have traced the clothing to Greenwich Village shops that cater to homosexuals. Mr. Bateson testified to having had a homosexual encounter with Mr. Verrill before crushing his head with a metal skillet and then stabbing him in the heart, which pretty much happens in Cruising in one of the scenes. There's there is like a serial killer who basically sounds a lot like him. That was another interesting movie in another way. I mean, it's not he made several about serial killers kind of over the years. This is probably the first one, but kind of I also didn't realize that he had directed The Boys in the Band, which was just, I think, remade by either Amazon or Netflix. Which was
I didn't realize that either.
Right? I had no idea. Even in the promotion for this, it wasn't
it took me a while to convince you that he did the Rules of Engagement. I was like, yes, he made that movie. It's like, there's some weird parts. Yeah,
very kind of forward at the time. Very kind of. Yeah, exactly. Very forward at the time. Well, it's kind of cut both ways, because on the one hand, it is this, back when I think, gay stories in American cinema were still pretty marginal. I mean, queer cinema itself was like pretty marginal overall. This is William Friedkin taking like a big swing at making this like gritty kind of cop thriller about the serial killer, but really kind of delved into like the leather scene of the late 70s. And I think it is like a fascinating artifact of that culture, like right on the precipice before AIDS showed up. And the kind of scene that was like alive in Greenwich Village and Manhattan at that time. And also watching like, I feel like it's a little bit of a bummer that the movie, I feel like if it was made today, and I don't think it would be made today, but like Al Pacino's like sexual kind of confusion would be like amped up way more, but it still plays with it. It's like a subtext of the entire movie. There's the one scene where he's like, he goes to like the, I think it was the Mine Shaft. They actually shot at a place called the Hellfire Club, which is a leather bar. And of course, Hellfire Club has like really sus origins, but where they're kind of playing this like.
I think that was a site of some of the real pickup killings, or at least it was.
But they wouldn't let Friedkin shoot in it because they objected to kind of the content of it. They didn't want a movie to be made, and
there was a big controversy. A lot of gay people were upset about it at the time.
Yes, exactly. And actually, for his research, he worked with the mafia, who at the time owned many of the city's gay bars, and so he was able to shoot somewhere. But yeah, there's like scenes where they're playing this kind of like thumping, like Village People kind of disco beats, and like Al Pacino's dressed up in like his leather out for the first time, and he just starts like wiling out on the dance floor and like is having so much fun. And it's just like I don't know, but the movie kind of pulls back from it a little bit, and it's like he's not really gay, but or maybe he's like he's bi-curious or something. But that movie did get a lot of shit, and I don't think he wanted. I think he saw this as like it would be like a pro LGBT movie, but it was not perceived in that way by at least the LGBT community in New York at the time, who I think boycotted the movie.
Yeah, I feel like he had a similar like kind of nonplussed attitude about it as he did with Rules of Engagement, which has been called one of the most like anti-Arab or like Islamophobic movies ever. But he was just like, how could it be, in order to make the movie we had to get permission from the King of Morocco, so obviously nothing is wrong, like it was the same kind of like sort of like I was just making a movie about the military war, like he just sort of like has this weird like I think he even said something that I in one of the documentaries I watched of actual interviews with him, where he said like I don't like politics, I don't like politicians, I don't put politics in my movies, like again.
So we got that old Grateful Dead line of like we're not political, man.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, they're all like very eminently political. And even The Exorcist, I would say, has a political character to it. As a lot of films do. They through their
particularly in this decade. I mean, even Jaws had like a little bit of a political corruption angle where like the mayor wanted to keep the city, the beach open to make money, and even though people were getting eaten by the shark, there was like all kinds of stuff in the 70s where almost everybody was like painting in those colors to some degree. So I don't quite believe that, I think it's a very common refrain that like I'm not political. You hear up to today, you hear like like a Tarantino say I'm not political, and I feel like ultimately that can only kind of be a cop out or just like an understandable but unfortunate attempt to like not have to deal with that, not to get into the weeds, and like almost to protect your artistic brain, you have to like pretend that you're not being political. Because if you start thinking about like all the implications of every choice you make, then you just end up kind of like paralyzed or start making bad artistic decisions because you are so focused on they were all kind of like ambiently brainwashed that like political art is like communist and dead and lifeless, and like American art is vital and like shoots from the hip and is all about feeling and affect and
exactly. I think that's kind of like what it was like. I just need to get into the mind of this. I'm just going to make a movie about this, like, and I'm not going to think about, like, the repercussions. I'm getting in the head of Jim Webb or into the head of, this guy Paul Bateson, I guess, or, like, getting into that environment. Because he actually went and, like, interviewed him after the fact, and talked to him, try to get, like, ideas about cruising. He would go to that guy Paul Bateson, who...
Really? When he was in jail?
Like, yeah, exactly. He went and like talked to him to be like, why did you do this? What that's another thing about like William Friedkin is that like not to create more work for you, but I feel like you should like play a little bit of his voice in this, because to me he sounds very like uncannily like Trump like a lot of the time. He has that same kind of like whiny like aspect to it where he'll just be make like like kind of that strained, like the way that Trump will talk about like China like we went here, we went there, like, and we were making a movie about faith, like that's like how he sat. It's really like to me bizarre. Yeah, like
it didn't jump out at me quite as much, but I do see the kind of vibe, because Leap of Faith movie is basically just kind of a one-shot interview in like his kind of like Versailles style like mansion.
Yeah, it's
where
crazy old Hollywood house where he's like, this print is from Eisenstein. Eisenstein was a genius. Wagner was a genius. You know, what can you say? You know, these men were amazing filmmakers. Like, that's like, you know,
he's got that
like
old school
reality, like Mirror Universe Trump, who like went to film school instead, and like, you know, will just be like, can you really say that Treasure of the Sierra Madre is better than Gone with the Wind? You can't, you know,
no, he's got he has like the same tenor of confidence in pretty much everything that he says. Like, there's no wavering. Like, he's already figured out how he feels about anything that he's talking about and has like his perspective on it. And it is, I mean, in content, it is perhaps, you know, it's definitely more artistic minded, but it definitely has that like brash boomer kind of you know, like, I mean, maybe Trump is kind of like a weird auteur in his own way.
In a way, his own way.
A nebulous, like, real estate celebrity billionaire kind of guy who's on reality TV, and that's a certain way. I mean, particularly if you're a director in Hollywood, you almost have to have a little bit of like Trumpian energy in you to get your way and to not get chewed up and spat out. You know, a lot of these directors that are kind of like more, I don't know, maybe a little bit more sensitive or introverted seem to have gotten chewed up worse and spat out by the early 80s. Whereas like Friedkin, he took his lumps for sure. Like, he took a lot of L's. I mean, some of those L's in retrospect are kind of great, like Sorcerer. But like, you know, Cruising like did okay, but everyone hated him because like liberals hated him because of his depiction of like the gay scene in New York. But then he just kind of kept on, you know, trucking, I guess, and bounced around and kind of, you know, I guess it might be a stretch to say that he bounced to like wildly different genres. They're all kind of like paranoid thrillers in some way, but some of them are like, you know, more cop based. Some of them are, you know, I mean, a lot of them are cop based, to be honest. But also like they're so different from kind of every other type of cop thing, like that, you know, because of these other layers he was like putting onto it, that, you know, his like I think we discussed on our Cobra episode, his main, you know, cop movie from the 80s that came out a year before Cobra was To Live and Die in L.A. And even though that in some ways is like a prototypical like 80s L.A. noir, it still has like a level of like mood and weirdness and darkness to it that you don't necessarily find in like Cobra or 48 Hours or Lethal Weapon or any of those other big cop movies. You know, it is it's like a strange film, given its relatively conventional plot.
But no, that's an interesting movie for sure. And I think they actually made like real counterfeit dollars for that movie as well.
Doesn't surprise me at all. That gets into kind of the weird mystical things about like money and the art world and abstraction, like the value of abstraction and like the dangerous potential of, you know, it's almost like what Willem Dafoe is doing in To Live and Die in L.A. is a form of like sorcery or like alchemy. Like he's an evil magician artist who is also like a criminal boss, like mastermind, who loves blasting people, and it's like incredibly psycho, but is like you know, tapping into something. He is kind of a sorcerer in a weird way.
This is what William Friedkin said, by the way, about Paul Bateson. He said about 2 or 3 years he told us to what website is this, a Mubi? All right, it's a notebook interview on Mubi.com. This is where he discusses Paul Bateson. About 2 or 3 years after The Exorcist came out, I'm reading the New York Times Daily News, and I see Paul Bateson's picture in the paper, and there's a long story of how he's suspected of having murdered 8 or 9 people in S&M clubs in downtown New York. His lawyer came, his lawyer's name was in the article, and I called his lawyer. Bateson was at Rikers Island, which is a holding facility where he was awaiting trial, and I asked his lawyer if Bateson would see me. Word came back that he would. So I went to Rikers and I saw Paul Bateson. I asked him if he had murdered these people, and he said, I remember murdering this one guy, Addison Burrell, who was the theater critic for Variety. Bateson picked him up in a place called the Mine Shaft in Lower Manhattan, took him home. They took a lot of drugs, you know the drill, and he wound up hitting him over the head with a frying pan, he remembered, and then cutting up and putting parts of Burrell's body in body bags that were found in the East River. Though Bateson worked with a brain surgeon, he himself was not a brain surgeon because the body bags all had little indications that they were from the NYU Medical Center, and that's how the police tracked him. Bateson told him the story about the mine shaft, and it turned out that a friend of mine, Matty Ianello, a big mafia figure who's still alive and nicknamed Matty the Horse, owned all the S&M clubs in New York. In fact, he owned Stonewall, where gay liberation really started. I asked Matty if he would give me permission to visit the mine shaft, and I did. At the same time, I knew a police detective named Randy Jurgensen who did what Pacino does in Cruising. Jurgensen was sent into the S&M world to see if he could find the killer because he resembled most of the victims. That gave me the story of Cruising. The confluence of Detective Jurgensen and what he did, Paul Bateson, and a murder mystery set in that world that was never solved. What happened to Paul Bateson, as he told me at the time, was that the police offered him a deal. If he would confess to 8 or 12 of these murders, they would shorten his sentence. I said, why? He said, so he could get headlines that 12 unsolved murders were now solved. I said, what are you going to do? He said, I don't know, I'm not sure. He got out 5 years ago. So that's what Friedkin says that this guy told him. People have, actually kind of indicted Friedkin for, representing this as being the case, and maybe suggested that he created this kind of myth around Cruising, to promote his personal brand. But that's, what he says. There's a really interesting article about him, about Paul Bateson, that is in the Village Voice, that I think is also possibly worth reading. It's called A Talk on the Wild Side. It's by Arthur Bell, and it came out in 1977, this article. This author writes, the gold crucifix dangles from a chain around Paul Bateson's neck. It was given to him by his mother, who had it blessed by Pope Pius XII in Rome. It is the same cross Bateson wore when he was arrested, September 23rd, for the murder of Variety reporter Addison Verrill. I guess Friedkin remembered him as being Burrell, but it's actually Verrill. That night, Bateson also wore the clothes he now wears in the visiting quarters of the men's house of detention at Rikers Island. A gray hooded sweatshirt, faded blue jeans, and work boots. But the outfit is clean. He has shaved off his beard, and the frenzied, agonized look of an alcoholic suffering delirium tremens has been replaced by one of serenity. In the tiny glass cubicle where we sit under the watchful eye of a security guard, Paul Bateson resembles a priest in a confessional booth, except he'd rather talk than listen. Bateson had agreed to an interview provided there would be no tape recorder or camera. Although we had not met before, we had spoken on the phone. Bateson had called me to confess the killing. He didn't give his name then, but he told about the murder as if recounting the plot of a 2-character play in which he and Verrill were merely actors. At Rikers, we do not speak of the call. My guess is that Bateson's lawyer warned him to be cautious during our 90-minute meeting. At one point, Bateson mumbles, I may have talked too much, but I don't think he knows, but I think he knows precisely what he's doing and talked just enough. He starts by barking when I ask if he is confined to the homosexual division of the prison. I'm not exclusively gay, he says. I just float in this world. It turns out he's housed in a cell block with 240 other men, 5 of whom are white and only 1 of whom, a guard, has made sexual advances. Each prisoner has his own cell with a toilet and sink facilities. Sleep comes between midnight and 5 a.m., the only hours it's quiet. Breakfast is served at 5:30, cold cereal or grits. After that, it's shower time. Bateson claims he'd never been arrested before. His chief gripe is that he's missing the Joffrey Ballet. Claustrophobia hasn't hit him yet. Although Rikers is not Silver Hill, Bateson is still using his confinement to dry out, build up, get in shape. He exercises, plays cards, watches cartoons and baseball games on television. In a way, it's nice. You're on your own, hardly under supervision. I'd welcome a little more discipline. Before his arrest, Bateson, who was 36, was drinking a minimum of a quart of vodka a day. The alcohol made him passive. During heavy drinking periods, he seldom left his Greenwich Village apartment. After a few shots, I'd shave and get dressed, then by the time I was ready to step into the world, I'd have consumed a quart and I'd had no energy left to move. Bateson's heavy drinking began when he was in the army, stationed in Germany. Because there was not that much to do, when he was discharged, he dried out and returned to Lansdale, Pennsylvania, his hometown. In October 1964, he moved to New York. Within a month, he met a man who was, and is, quote, involved in music. According to Bateson, the relationship was, quote, the days of wine and roses, a 9-year party during which enough alcohol was consumed to fill the Finger Lakes. I can't count the number of cocktail parties I went to at the Pierre, he says, or the number of times we had guests over to the apartment for drinks and dinner. I'm an excellent cook. When the relationship ended, Paul moved to the Borough Park section of Brooklyn and commuted to Manhattan, where he worked as a neuro X-ray technologist at NYU Medical Center. William Friedkin directed the Linda Blair operation sequence of The Exorcist in the hospital's X-ray room. Bateson played a small part in the scene. It was sort of blade revenge on my father, since he would punish me by not allowing me to go to Sunday matinees or Saturday matinees when I was young. He made me stay at home and listen to opera on the radio. Bateson's father is a retired metallurgist who remarried after Bateson's mother died of stroke in 1969. The same year, his younger brother committed suicide. At this writing, Bateson does not know about his son's imprisonment. Wow. When not dressed in hospital white, Paul donned the costume of the pseudo-bikers who shop for earrings at the pleasure chest and shop around for studs at the Eagle's Nest. Leather impresses me. I never identify with swishes or drag queens. They give gays a bad name, like any type of extreme group would. That's funny. Okay. Bateson's group frequented the backroom bars, more in 1970 when they first became popular than recently. He was not a regular at the Anvil or Mine Shaft. About 4 years ago, he claims his social life reached a new low. So 4 years ago, literally, like, during the time of the movie. Nobody likes a drunk, he says, or the movie coming out. Nobody likes a drunk, he says, the stigma. And 2 years ago, he was fired from his hospital job. Then he began floating around, doing menial chores, cleaning apartments, installing lighting fixtures, cashiering at a porn movie house. There was a period of sobriety, too, when he attended AA meetings. Many evenings were spent drinking coffee with fellow alcoholics and resisting the call of the bottle in bars. I concentrate on trying to meet someone I could get involved with. I ask if he remembers what he says and does when he's under the influence. Drunkards tend to forget things. I repeat myself. Blackouts is what they're called, but mostly I just talk a lot. Drinking cuts my sex life, too. As I get high, the urge is there and stronger, but the ability to perform is unsuccessful. Of course, the inability to perform while drunk affects the people he goes to bed with. It isn't nice, especially if climax is the main objective, but I look for more than just the physical. I search for complete companionship. The idea of being a sex object is not my scene. Perhaps it is inevitable. As he talks, I find myself attracted to him. He is extraordinarily appealing, interesting in a quiet way, and his revelations are without self-pity, yet I'm aware that he's playing with me. At the same time, he's confiding in someone whose articles he reads, someone who may be able to help him, but who is partly responsible for his capture. If our roles were reversed, I doubt I'd have anything to do with the reporter. But here he is, coming on, subtly at first, then stronger. To keep from responding, I avoid his eyes, though I know they're electric blue, and stare at his crucifix when I'm not staring at my notepad. Very Village Voice, 1977. I asked him if he can project what will happen with his case. Probably a long jury trial. A lot of people will be hurt. Parents, friends, I'll be judged not guilty. Then I'll tear up my roots and settle somewhere else. I'll try to grow new roots. As I prepare to leave, he says he wishes he could go home with me. Strange, eerie feelings. This is the man who was admitted to killing someone I knew. Yet if we had met 6 weeks ago, and the proposition had been made in a bar instead of a prison, I'd have said, "You're on." All right. But yeah. Anyway, it's interesting how he completely obviously he had been an alcoholic prior to the film, it seems, but kind of after the release of the movie, that's when his life fell apart. It's just very chilling. This is the guy who you see in the movie being like, "Okay, Reagan, this is gonna hurt a little bit," really he has the biggest part of any of those radiologists in that.
You're doing great. You're doing great. Yeah, he's very professional, together, reassuring.
Yeah, I wonder, William Friedkin mentioned, when talking about him in another interview, he said, he was a really nice young guy. I remember he wore a leather-studded bracelet and he had an earring, which in 1972 was not common in the workplace. And he, I guess
I did notice he was wearing an earring. Yeah, he wore an earring in that scene.
Yeah, he was praised for having a great bedside manner, and I guess he does seem to have a pretty good bedside manner in the scene. But it's very interesting that his life just completely fell apart after that, and he collapsed in alcoholism and then committed all these murders. Very interesting. Definitely an eerie aspect of the movie. Yeah.
So, just to circle back to like the content of The Exorcist proper, there was something I think maybe we alluded to earlier. We talked about it before we started recording, but that's the very like curious liminal presence of like post-war Nazis in all of Friedkin's or in a lot of Friedkin's movies. Certainly, like most of them from the 70s. I think you could point out like some kind of reference. It's definitely it's big in Sorcerer, and that's where I first noticed it with Friedkin. Was there all these like little tiny moments that I mean, there's one aspect of it which is that one of the four people that end up on this like suicidal truck journey is like an assassin who goes there to murder like the original guy who's gonna go on this journey with them, who is like a Nazi, like an escape, some kind of fugitive Nazi. It's never really clear what, but he's like a German guy. And there's like the bartender at the bar in the town they're at is like a German, and then there's this very prominent shot of like the logo of the oil company they work for, which is a kind of at first glance it looks kind of like an Aztec kind of eagle, but you notice it's like painted very vividly in black, so it's a black eagle, and it's still kind of in the classic position that you would expect like a Nazi eagle, perhaps just like hiding behind some like local indigenous like folk art traditions, but nonetheless it is like the Nazi Black Eagle Trust basically. That was the thing that jumped out at me, was like like no, and I mean, given the politics of like what we discussed before, what was going on in South America at the time, it's like a very weird, astute thing to kind of like throw in there. But I guess what I didn't know is that there was like some mentions of Nazis in The Exorcist, which I feel like is something that doesn't really get talked about a lot. It's something that gets kind of lost in all the horror and the craziness with the demonic possession, that I think a lot of people like forget this little plot point in the movie.
Mm-hmm. There's two weird plot points that I feel like people forget. One is kind of the allegation to, there's like, as you mentioned, the sort of church desecration that occurs around these events, and it's unknown who perpetrated that, and there's sort of an implication that there might be some kind of witchcraft involved. And that's one kind of thread that gets woven through. And then there's the character that we mentioned a little bit earlier, who's kind of like a weird sort of Polanski surrogate, and like intimated by Reagan to be like a romantic interest for like her mother, the director on her like Ho Chi Minh Disney movie. And he's kind of like an asshole, sort of vibe. And at the big party where, I mean, another interesting aspect is the sort of space stuff, because it's the same party where, Reagan comes downstairs and pees on the floor and says to this guy who's about to go into space, like, you're gonna die up there.
And earlier in the party, it's very kind of authentic, almost, cinema verite, like sort of douchey Georgetown cocktail chatter of like, well, like the Apollo missile is actually like greatly advanced, and it's like there's the astronaut is basically kind of talking shop with some some other guy about the ins and outs of like the rocket programs that NASA has, and perhaps ICBMs, things like that. So like that jumped out at me first of all. Was like, oh, there's a weird kind of like astronaut thing, and then almost as if like on cue in the next scene, the director Burke he's already drunk, and he kind of starts talking shit to the servant, to Chris's
the manservant.
Her like
manservant.
Who's an older gentleman, and he starts throwing around saying that he's like calling him a Nazi, and says like, I don't suppose that you were the one going bowling with Hermann Goering before the war, Nazi bastard.
With Goebbels.
With Goebbels. Did you go bowling with Goebbels? And the guy kind of hilariously says like, I am Swiss.
Exactly. Like,
that's his reaction.
It comes in like in media res, where the guy, like, the guy's already yelling at him and saying like, it's really funny because like the scene starts, I think, or you first hear their exchange like in the middle, where he's like saying like, I told you for the last time, like, I'm not a Nazi. It's like, okay, sure. Like, exactly. And But that character is sort of an interesting character because he sort of sees it through to the end. The Carl, played by Rudolph Schundler, is the manservant, I guess, which is it's interesting to have a house servant, but I guess she's like a celebrity, so the mother of
she has a lot of help. She has like two people
exactly.
with her.
Yeah, and like the police lieutenant asks for her autograph and stuff, so she's rich. And she retains, I guess, this guy. But yeah, he's like he's a sus figure because he seems to be the one who puts the crucifix under Reagan's pillow that I guess he then kind of masturbates with famously, and that.
Oh God, yeah, I didn't even make that connection. Well, because she had taken it. You're right, because now that I think about it, she finds a crucifix underneath Reagan's bed, and then she goes around in the house and starts kind of, is very upset about it and starts asking everybody, did you do this? Did you put it here? And I think Carl goes like, no, I did not, and kind of plays like dumb a little bit. And nobody, like the 3 or 4 people she asks, like nobody says, that. And then the detective comes over. And I remember distinctly, like she puts the crucifix down on like the entryway table when he arrives. Like she doesn't really want to like show it to him, and they had that long conversation where he and this is after Burke ends up dead from presumably flying out of Reagan's window when he was supposed to be watching her, I guess when other people had left the house. And so the detective's coming around,
kind of, she breaks his neck, like his neck is twisted all the way around. That's kind of what the famous head turning around scene is a reference to, like the manner of his death.
Yes, exactly. The detective is, I mean, he's like a little suspicious, and all these things, and of course they have this like polite conversation that goes on for a while, and he kind of reveals that like he believes that a large man must have done this because obviously like Reagan couldn't have done it, but he still has kind of these vague suspicions because he feels like he was probably thrown out of your daughter's window, and that's odd, and all these other things. And he's already revealed to Father Karras that he's kind of considering different ideas for like what this might be. He thinks it might be a deranged priest because he thinks that the desecration of the statue of Mary might have been a part of like a very specific, ritual black mass where like a priest who would know these rites was like inverting them, and then maybe this priest went to this nearby house and killed this guy and twisted his head around in a weird way and all that stuff. But anyways, like, so okay, you kind of get distracted by all that stuff going on. Then the detective finally leaves, and then I think that's when there's commotion from the upstairs, and Chris goes back up there, and Reagan is like masturbating like violently with the crucifix, but she had put the crucifix down. It was not in her room anymore, unless there was like another one in there. So that almost leads you to believe that like Carl, like while they were having their conversation, like sneakily took the crucifix and like went back up in there and put it under her bed. And that's never resolved in the movie. I mean, it's never
just
kind
a
of
plot hole, or I guess she could have just like prestidigitated it like back into her hands, But yeah, I mean, she definitely masturbates with the crucifix,
and it's the same one for all intents and purposes, as far as we can tell. It's just kind of that might have been a plot hole, but at the same time, given that it's also kind of a plot hole that you never find out who did that. And it seems like it would be Carl. Carl is the most suspicious person of all the people that are like working for them, the most likely to have. He also, you pointed out at one point, I think when Max von Sydow finally shows up, he says something like it isn't taking food or something like that.
Yeah,
exactly. He refers to Reagan as it.
Right, he knows that she's demonically possessed, which is interesting.
And also, also just to go back to the party, like William Friedkin kind of puts, he puts like an extra fine point on it where like not only is there that passing cocktail chatter where Burke is calling him a Nazi, but then later he's like even drunker and they're in the kitchen together and he says another thing about him being a Nazi, and Carl like flips out and is like, I will kill you, and like basically like lunges at him and tries to choke him. Yeah, they have to pull him off and shit. So like he seems to be very touchy about being called a Nazi.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing about like bowling with Goebbels is like very specific. It seems like this guy like somehow became aware that like this is like a war criminal or something that is like laying low in Washington D.C. and you know, working for rich people, living a very quiet life, and he seems to be very specifically agitated. But he doesn't just seem to be a German, you know, Germanophobe or whatever. You know, generally speaking, though he does seem, I forget, does he have a vaguely foreign accent?
Yeah, he does.
I can't remember if it's English or if it's just like vaguely European.
Yeah, I don't quite remember, but
either way, I think the idea that, you know, this is this young hotshot director making kind of like liberal mid-cult movies and has like the same haircut and style and kind of attitude as like a Roman Polanski in this movie that is about demonic, like the devil possessing people, and then he shit talks a Nazi at a Washington cocktail party, and then slowly after the devil kills him. This is kind of like, I don't know, there's a lot going on there a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Like commentary on Hollywood, on Polanski.
Yeah, it's a super interesting aspect of the movie that like is kind of there. Yeah, there's all these like weird sort of aspects that kind of pivot around the main sort of set piece of Reagan's bedroom that I feel like are, you know, less remembered. It's weird because like those are almost like, it's famously like a movie that has like subliminal images that like aren't really subliminal because everyone like sees them and knows of them. But those are almost a subliminal aspect of the movie. It's like these weird like sort of plot holes that you don't like really quite remember, or these strange sort of loose ends in the plot. Yeah.
He did though say in Leap of Faith that, of course, like the cutaway, the single frames of Captain Howdy, the demon that is possessing Regan.
Yeah.
Which are pretty effective and creepy. They get slipped in throughout the movie, and you do notice them, so they're not like strictly subliminal. But he also said that in this movie and later movies, he said like, that's one level of stuff I did, but then there's stuff that like you were not going to be able to perceive that's like in the sound design and other kind of stuff that is like it is literally
like
subliminal.
The ticking clock, like in that one scene where there's like that, you know, clock ticking. Just, you know, as you know, Chris is like in the downstairs and she just gets off the phone and there's that sort of ticking grandfather clock in the background that you don't necessarily notice, right?
No, I don't think I did. And there was the clock that stopped in the beginning of it, right? And didn't he say that was like a coincidence? Like it happened while they were shooting that scene where he's with like the antiquities dealer, and the clock in the room stopped, and he decided to just use that. And there's like a big moment where Max von Sydow like just walks up to it and kind of clocks it and is disturbed. There's like all kinds of weird little things like that going on.
Yeah, I guess one of the stories that I like came up on a bunch of the documentaries I watched was that Max von Sydow like had a big problem like saying, you know, the power of Christ compels you, like, or delivering the line well because he like didn't believe in God. And William Friedkin was like, but you played Jesus, you know, like how, and he's like, yeah, well, I played him as a normal man or something. It's like, well, just play this as a normal man who believes in God or something. But it took him a while. But of course, you know, it's now a famous performance, so obviously he eventually mastered it. But I guess it was a big stumbling block for him.
He got his result.
Yeah, I guess a lot, you know. Yeah,
well, now you know what? Did you ever find anything about this movie in terms like analysis of it that suggests maybe that Carl was involved in the demonic possession of Reagan? Because he's
I didn't
a Nazi
come across anything
occultist.
Like that. No.
Okay, I'm just thinking in terms of like if you were going to attempt to tie up some loose ends, that it is still not. It is completely not fleshed out in the movie who desecrated the church, and it couldn't have been. It comes too early in the plot, I think, for it to have been Reagan. I don't think she's like really exhibiting extreme behavior like that yet. And I don't think the movie really wants to suggest that it was her. So it's like,
I mean, it is
who did it
interesting
then?
that to consider that he maybe did it and that he was like an cultist of some kind. I don't know. There is. I just Googled like Karl Exorcist Nazi, and what came up was a forum post on CaptainHowdy.com, the #1 Exorcist fan site since 1999.
Wow.
Which is, just, was Karl a Nazi? The replies are, he was Swiss, but we know that Burke called him a cunting Hun and a butchering Nazi. He seemed to hate Karl, and one could tell it was extremely personal. Maybe Burke was Jewish? Many Swiss, who are in fact majority ethnic Germans, collaborated with the Nazis, although they were officially neutral. Could Burke's hatred of Karl be linked to his possible Jewish background? If Burke was Jewish, does that make his murder a hate crime? Was the demon Pazuzu an anti-Semite? Interesting post there.
What if Karl murdered Burke?
It's definitely conceivable. It's also possible for sure. I mean, I guess he would be the main suspect if it weren't for the existence of Pazuzu. But
unless he was also involved, because she talked on the Ouija board to Captain Howdy. That's sort of suggested that, that
what is the significance of Captain Howdy, by the way? Like, he's a captain? Like, is he, like, Obersturmführer Howdy?
Exactly. Or is this, like Dr. Green or something? Like, this is his MK Ultra code name? Because he seems to be, he's the one that is around her. So if he were going to do anything bad, I think they even ask her under hypnosis at one point, is Captain Howdy the one that's possessing you? And she's like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or something like
gives
that.
Very vague answers like, can I talk to the one possessing you? And she's like, no. Yeah. Right. I guess apparently there's a book called American Exorcist, Critical Essays on William Peter Blatty, that deals with fear. There's an essay in that by Philip L. Simpson called Fear of the Assimilation of the Foreign Other in The Exorcist. I mean, that could be about a lot of different things, but on this post on CaptainHowdy.com, someone does sort of imply that, this might be...
People are kind of going for it. I see Fist wrote on December 5th, 2009, that this also links us back to World War II in Europe, where Father Marin had witnessed so much horror. The demon was there as well. The demon targeted Burke, who could possibly have been Jewish, and the Christian priest, yet never harmed Karl. If Burke's serious allegations against Karl were true, it could somehow make sense for Pazuzu not to target him. As for Regan, she was just collateral damage in the demon's war against Marin. Wow. I mean... It's I think it's all liminal, so you can't really say. But that does always kind of like stick out, like Captain Howdy, like who, like that's just such a wacky kind of throwaway. I mean, maybe it's the ideas is supposed to sound fun and like cute, but it sounds like a scary, like a creepy adult in a van or something. Like, I'm Captain Howdy. Like, it sounds like a predatory like nickname you would give to sound not scary to like a 12-year-old, right? But yeah, it's true that the demon does not attack Karl at any point, even though he's the one putting the crucifix probably under Regan's pillow, even though he maybe even goes back and puts it back after Chris removes it, and nothing bad happens to him, but Burke gets his head twisted around and thrown out a window. And if we don't know if Burke is Jewish, but I would say the odds, and also given that he is modeled after Roman Polanski, it's almost kind of implied that
but another aspect that just occurred to me, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that it's just occurring to me, given the Roman Polanski connection, is like, I guess he was watching her, he was babysitting her, but like, what was he doing in her bedroom?
Exactly.
It's a little bit like, sus. There's another sus aspect to, like, you know, Burke, that, yeah.
That is definitely with Polanski and everything. Like, there's a kind of weird thing, kind of, you know, and of course this would have been before Polanski's legal problems with all of that, but it did kind of jump out at me a little bit as, you know, Burke would never go in her room, and it's like, y'all were way too trusting of like hotshot Hollywood directors in 1973. Like, I don't know. You certainly seem to be kind of all over the place, but I don't know.
But I wonder
maybe we're just
if there's
projecting
maybe
what we.
I wonder if there's maybe some implication. I don't know. Yeah, there's a. Yeah. There's I don't know. There's a lot of different interpretations.
And I don't know if Friedkin, because Friedkin kind of like popped off maybe right after. Well, I mean, Polanski was still in Hollywood throughout most of the 70s. I don't know to what extent they knew each other or were friends or didn't like each other or anything like that. It looks like he's poking a little fun. I don't know if it's in good nature or if he's like making a kind of douchey caricature, because the character of Burke is like a little bit douchey as far as, you know, a Hollywood director goes, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Though, I mean, I couldn't help but get on his side when, especially if he's Polanski, he'd be pretty pissed if he saw a Nazi, given his childhood.
Yeah, I guess.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would make sense, right?
Really, any continental European would, you know, have not, especially if they're Jewish, would react pretty bad to that. So, I don't know. But it's an interesting, I don't know. I'm just looking at Carl Engstrom, you know. He's just sort of floating around there, never getting attacked by the demon, putting crosses in there, which, I don't know, does that just, like, piss off the demon more? Is that, like, a kind of sacrilege thing? Because, I mean, you know, is it really helping if you're just slipping a cross in there as opposed to doing a proper exorcism, you know? Or are you just making it worse?
Well, I don't know, yeah. Or was he just, I mean, like, you know, crosses can be, I mean, the swastika is basically a cross, you know? Like, just because, like, you're trying to protect yourself from, like, a demon using, like, your knowledge, you know, of, like, this thing doesn't necessarily mean that you're good, you know? Like, if you're, like, an old Nazi, like, in retirement, like, whether, you know, he might, you know, I mean, even in Sorcerer, you know, there is, like, you know, in a lot of William Friedkin's movies, like, you know, in Sorcerer, for instance, or in To Live and Die in L.A., there isn't really, like, a super great, like, heroic guy, you know, who's perfect. I mean, Father Karras is, like, kind of a good, you know, like, a very fairly upstanding protagonist type figure, but in Sorcerer, you know, they're all very seedy people. And, like, you know, one person, of course, you know, I feel like this is a theme that comes up, like, one of them is, like, a Palestinian terrorist, you know, who's, like, friends with the Nazi, you know? Yeah, so, but, like, they're all, you know, supposed to be kind of these low lives, and so I feel like, and even, you know, the Nazi guy at one point is kind of positioned as being, you know, a potential member of this group, you know, so I feel like maybe he could have, like, an ambiguous role, like, despite, you know, there's an ambiguity about whether it's true that he's a Nazi, so, you know, maybe he's making some kind of point there. About the you know, the ambiguity or the nature,
questioning whether or not people are Nazis. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, it's always hovering in the background, even though he does sound kind of like fascinated by Hitler in a very classic, like, baby.
Yeah, he did.
Way.
That was a very funny quote from William Friedkin, where he went on a long. There's a movie called Friedkin Uncut, which is I think I've mentioned earlier. And he, you know, the movie opens with this long monologue about him saying just the two greatest people in history are Jesus and Hitler, you know, and he's like, I don't admire Hitler at all, but he was an example of extremes. In terms of the 20th century, he was evil incarnate, but I know a lot of things about Hitler that don't add up to that. Does it mean that our obsession of him should change? You know, like, and he just, like, goes on about how, like, he made, a big impression.
I love that he does that, but then meanwhile, in the Leap of Faith documentary, he, like, casually mentions at some point about, like, human cruelty. Like, you know, Stalin killed 20 million of his own people because he thought they were worthless.
Yeah,
that's
they
how
were worthless. Yeah, exactly.
that was just a parable about like the human condition. Was like, oh yeah, Stalin just like
I think he
murdered
did,
them
to
all
be fair,
because
mention Hitler first, and then he was
did.
like, and Stalin.
He
also,
did the classic 1-2 punch of like, I'm gonna start talking about how bad Hitler was, and also Stalin was like kind of for no reason except that he just hated his people and wanted to kill them because they're worthless or something like that. So he's showing the kind of typical, kind of boomer Hollywood, both sides. That humanity's a shit. Drop the bomb. Like everything sucks. And Stalin was just as evil, but he's not as like fascinated by Stalin as he is by Hitler.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. No, he's definitely not one of the big two of Jesus and Hitler. But yeah, like I'm seeing also on these forums, I guess like the going theory about the desecration of the statue is that Reagan like snuck out at night and did it using the clay that she is seen to use to make those little clay sculptures. And but I don't know. I almost think it's more interesting if it's unclear. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, it's definitely not like explicitly stated or made very clear that it was her. I suppose it's possible. Churches do tend to sometimes be open late at night, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not that hard to sneak into. Yeah. But it just dangles there a little bit, and and the cop for a while seems very interested in the idea that there's like a cult running around doing this.
Yes.
Doing all this stuff. And
definitely.
What if it's a bunch of Nazis, including Carl?
It's possible. Yeah,
psyoping
for sure.
everybody with this horrible thing to get everybody to believe in mysticism again. Or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
or maybe I don't know. It could be there's multiple interpretations, but yeah, the character of Carl is definitely a weird kind of loose end in the movie. Yeah, is he a Nazi? Yeah, is he involved in some kind of cult? Like what's being telegraphed here? There's definitely much like Sorcerer, there's like that sort of subtle implication. There's something going on.
Exactly.
Yeah, and both Burke and Carl, like underappreciated character aspects of the movie, where it's sort of like what's being gotten at here. I think there could be something.
Yeah, they do a lot with in the margins a little bit, and I mean maybe that can kind of bring us to I think why it's interesting is like looking at his overall filmography and the plots of the various movies that like he went on to make. Like we talked about a couple of them, To Live and Die in L.A. and Sorcerer and Cruising and The French Connection before that. But there's a number that I haven't watched yet, and I don't think you have either, but I just went through them like earlier today, and I was amazed that we got kind of like 5 out of 5 hits basically for very interesting, like with the exception of probably Blue Chips from 1994, which is just like a sport, like a college sports basketball comedy starring Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway. Besides that, which actually I don't know, I'd have to watch it. Maybe it does have some sus elements in it, but there were a number here. Oh yeah, and obviously Rules of Engagement, which we like talked about, which was written by Jim Webb. But like even going back to the 80s, so like I noticed a few of these that really jump out with like, okay, he's got to be painting a lot in the margins. Like the first of which is The Deal of the Century from 1983, which starred Chevy Chase, Gregory Hines, and Sigourney Weaver. That was, I guess, intended to be kind of like the Dr. Strangelove of the 80s. And it's about a small-time American arms dealer who talks his way into a job with a large defense corporation selling high-tech military unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, to a South American dictator. And like it's like a kind of a wacky, absurdist like thing that all revolves around the Peacemaker UAV, a military dream that operates without pilots or air bases. But the military junta of the fictional country of San Miguel like strings these guys along, and like it sounds like, I mean, like there's some deep intrigue with like the military industrial complex going on in this movie, and I'd never even heard of this. In everything I've ever heard about William Friedkin, you know, I guess it didn't do well. It's not considered great. It has an 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, but I feel like the subject matter alone is kind of like, whoa, that is pretty interesting, kind of ambitious, given what we saw in Sorcerer with his kind of South American, and you know, just as a brief side note about Sorcerer, like the production of that was even more notorious than The Exorcist, because he went down, I think it was to Bolivia, and like actually went out in the middle of the jungle and, you know, wanted to film like documentary style these trucks like almost falling off the cliff, and like they did almost fall off the cliff sometimes, and like blowing up like tree trunks with dynamite. Like he went on some crazy shit that would probably get you like sued to oblivion today. You would never be able to do it. But he really pushed everybody like to the limit and like spent a ton of studio money.
Being like a maniacal director, I think, like throughout his career, like he was known as having like fits of anger and just anyway. So you know, there's a lot going on with that, and then in 1987, you know, he goes back to kind of crime, and he wrote and directed and produced Rampage, starring Michael Biehn. I always forget what it is. I'm a fan of his, though. I always like his shit. You know, he's one of these 80s like staple character actors. Right, he was Kyle Reese, right? Yeah.
Yes, in Terminator 1 and Corporal Hicks in Aliens. Yeah, and so, but in this, he actually plays Charles Reese, which is bizarre. I don't know why. I don't know why his name is Charles Reese as well, but he plays a serial killer who commits a number of brutal mutilation slayings in order to drink blood as a result of paranoid delusions. And then I guess a lot of the movie is a trial, like a courtroom drama, of him trying to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. And then there's like, so I don't know. I think this... I guess this is based on the serial killer Richard Chase.
Is that the Vampire Sacramento?
Yes, it was. It was a necrophile, cannibal, rapist, and serial killer who killed 6 people in the span of a month in Sacramento, California. He drank their blood and cannibalized his victims, and that was... wow. So
that must have... I feel like the whole experience with Paul Bateson must have factored into that choice.
It must have.
Similar to Cruising.
It does have a score like Panos Cosmatos' Nazi SS Massacre movie by Ennio Morricone. So that's something. It sounds a little bit like Program to Kill kind of vibes going on. But it also he says that he said there are a lot of people who love Rampage, but I don't think I hit my own mark with that. So, you know, not super I guess successful, but then and that was also produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who did the Rambo movies, I believe. He was in that 80s action producer with like Andrew Vina and Cosmatos and all those people. So, you know, you had those, and then you had a more kind of back to Exorcist. The first horror movie he did since The Exorcist was The Guardian, where like a nanny is hired by 2 parents.
The Guardian, and she was like a tree, a
dryad. A hamadryad.
Hamadryad, right, yes. Word. That's, we should, definitely, because I actually have seen The Guardian, and that is another one of those movies that I did not realize that William Friedkin made. So I feel like we need to discuss
She
that.
Sacrifices babies to a tree.
Yeah.
So it's like there's some human sacrifice shit. There's
that's like one of those very, very weird like monster like selection for that movie. Like not one that you normally see of like a tree witch, like elemental being. Yeah, there is definitely like some stuff there in The Guardian. Yeah, for sure.
So you know, so like that's, you know, we'd have to see it, but I have a feeling that, you know, there's some weird things going on.
I feel like we could definitely weave that through. I'm just reading on Wikipedia about the movie now because when you said that I reacted with surprise that was William Friedkin movie, but I guess originally it was a Sam Raimi project, and it was supposed to be tongue in cheek, but then Friedkin came in and he was like, no, this is going to be about mythology and Lilith,
well, so, there's that, and then...
Wow, there's some great stuff in here. After Volk suggested using elements from the M.R. James story, The Ash Tree, in the script, Friedkin became fixated on incorporating a tree into the backstory. Volk reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown in the production, leaving Friedkin to finish the script's loose ends after filming had already begun. This is great. Pages were flying at us, and then suddenly this weird kind of idea of this weird kind of tree came about. And suddenly my character was not just a nanny, but she was a tree. That's great. We're definitely, we're going to have to do some more Friedkin episodes, and I think that we need to go do a deeper dive into The Guardian.
I think these B-sides sound very promising in terms of their subject matter.
I mean, just Sorcerer itself, is a fairly, little known movie. Until you recommended Sorcerer to me, I had not seen it or come across it or had anyone else recommend it to me. And, it's an amazing movie. It's probably better than The Exorcist. Well, they're both different types of films, but they really interact in an interesting way. And even though people were outraged that there was no Sorcerer in it and it wasn't a more proper Exorcist sequel, in a way it is it does have that sort of sense of successorship in terms of the ideas. And you definitely can see some of the same stuff in The Guardian, now that I reflect upon it. Again, something I haven't seen in many years, but...
Pazuzu literally makes, several cameos in Sorcerer. What more do you want?
Yeah, there is, a weird, Aztec...
a similar...
exactly, a sort of Aztec gargoyle that he zooms in on.
On the highway.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
And, so I think that... and I think, actually, Sorcerer made me appreciate The Exorcist more. I'd obviously seen Exorcist... think had to watch it in college, and it was one of those foundational movies that you have to examine, and I liked it, but it was kind of Exorcist, it didn't really stir me as kind of I saw it as a kind of stylistic and achievement of craft, but the kind of weird liminal content in it didn't really come out until you see Sorcerer, and then you're like, whoa, okay, this is a very weird take on basically adapting The Wages of Fear, the French movie from the 40s, which was about the same thing, 4 guys driving a truck full of dynamite, and, but it takes such a... And given that this is the Exorcist guy directing it, it's what is he going for here? But it's mesmerizing, and it's really engrossing.
It's the immediate follow-up as well, which, expectations were so high, and they were, quite disastrously disappointed in terms of, I think the trailer for this ran before Star Wars, and they were getting blown off the screen by what people were seeing in Star Wars. But it came out around the same time, and I think that lots of people attribute its failure to that. But
interesting interesting that almost Sorcerer was in a lot of ways the kind of high water mark of. Almost to the point of being literally death-defying and dangerous practical effects in a big Hollywood movie that had matured to that point where it's no, his approach was we got to go down to the jungles of Bolivia. We have to go on rural mountain roads.
Literally, drive this truck over, the famous scene in Sorcerer, the truck bridge scene.
Oh,
they really brought that truck over the bridge. It's a collapsing rope bridge, and they're carrying a truck full of in the movie explosive nitroglycerin, but it's still a real truck that they really drove across this collapsing bridge. It's such an intense scene. It's really and that's the sense of the Sorcerer is this sort of the caprice of fate, the tension and at any moment by the whims of fate this truck will either make it or not. You're in the hands of this, and there's even more, but
It's a great. I think that's my favorite Friedkin movie. I think by a mile, though. We'll see when I go through these other ones, but it just kind of operates on this.
I mean, it'll be
this
hard
level.
to top
And Star Wars was the
Sorcerer.
opposite. Star Wars was a bunch of like toys inside of Industrial Light and Magic, like zooming around, which is not to knock.
Literally, it was like a shoebox, like with World War II toys in it. Yeah,
I guess they were practical effects in the sense they weren't like computerized, like for the most part. They were like models, and they were innovative, and they used like dogfight, camera footage from World War II to model it, and all that. We all know the story.
They had big puppets, Jim Henson. It was like do.
That's where the real magic was.
And JJ brought it back. Yeah, exactly.
But JJ would not be allowed, nor would I think he would be willing or capable of bringing back the bridge crossing scene from Sorcerer.
No, he would not be capable or willing, and that would be the absolute worst nightmare ever. That would never happen, but it's just as making me vomit thinking about the prospect of that. But yeah, it would just be terrible. And it just wouldn't. Yeah, I feel like it would almost be Michael Bay. I'm picturing a Michael Bay take on Sorcerer. I don't know. It just would not be. It's truly a singular movie. But. Yes, and definitely the same. It's definitely an interesting piece to read alongside The Exorcist. Yeah, there was also Jade, which I
want to talk about Jade briefly.
I remember William Friedkin saying that he was just shocked that people didn't like Jade because he really thought he hit the mark with that one. I haven't actually seen it, but in reading or in viewing some Friedkin interviews, he mentioned it. Yeah.
I haven't either, but just in reading the basic synopsis, I had actually never heard of this movie at all. But then in just reading the synopsis of it, I thought, this is like primo subliminal jihad kind of content that they were working with this story, because it's a kind of police sort of, it's more like a political, erotic conspiracy thriller starring David Caruso. And he plays a San Francisco assistant district attorney, David Corelli, who's called to the murder scene of prominent businessman Kyle Medford, found bludgeoned to death in his home by an antique hatchet. Police detectives find photographs in Medford's safe of Governor Lou Edwards having sex with a prostitute. During questioning, the prostitute reveals that other women and she were paid by Medford to have sex with wealthy men at his beach house in Pacifica. She also informs them that the most desired prostitute among the clients was a woman known only as Jade. And, I won't read the entire thing, but what I did find immediately jumping out is that I guess maybe the main antagonist, Jade, in the movie, who is running with these powerful people, and is a famous clinical psychologist in San Francisco. Her name is Katrina Gavin, and she's married to Corelli's best friend, defense attorney Matt Gavin. I guess there's drugs, there's alcohol, sex toys, hidden video cameras, blackmail operations, and murder plots, and it's all around the high society of San Francisco. And the antagonist's last name are Gavin, which, Gavin Newsom was a young guy in 1995, though he was third generation political royalty. I'm not saying that anybody was predicting the future by naming them Gavin, but it is kind of funny. And the film's tagline is "Some fantasies go too far." But basically, this sounds like San Francisco elites are running an Epstein kind of, at least a kind of escort blackmail operation thing that escalates into like murder and depravity and all this other stuff. So, and this came out before Eyes Wide Shut, 1995, and I don't know, God, it had a $50 million budget. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Like an adult, like erotic thriller by William Friedkin. And it actually was from a script by Joe Esterhaus, who for a while was the highest earning screenwriter in Hollywood, probably of all time, if we're being honest. I mean, everything from like Die Hard to, later on, The Last Boy Scout, Lethal Weapon, that was kind of his big come up. And I think by the mid-90s, though, he started to get kind of, he made Showgirls, which actually won the Razzie for 1995. So he was competing against himself for the 2 worst screenplay awards for this movie, Jade, and Showgirls. And Showgirls won. But Friedkin did say it contained...
Who made Showgirls?
Joe Esterhaus, and I believe that was Paul Verhoeven directed it.
I see.
Another interesting director overall.
Wow. But Joe Esterhaus. Wow, that's quite a bad year for I guess Caruso also was had a banner year at the Razzies that year.
I guess he did, and
David Caruso, who was starring in the movie.
There's an unrated director's.
Pirelli.
Yeah, there's an unrated director's cut with more explicit sex footage, additional 12 minutes, that was released on VHS, but it's now out of print. So I guess you can't get the unrated version anymore. But I guess you can
Friedkin
still find it.
Wrote in his autobiography, The Friedkin Connection. He said, "It contains some of my best work. I felt I had let down the actors, the studio, and most of all, Sherry." That was his wife at the time, Paramount executive.
Nice.
I went into a deep funk. Was it the Exorcist curse, as many have suggested? A poor choice of material? Or simply that whatever talent I had was ephemeral? Maybe all of the above. He blamed the Exorcist curse for the poor performance of Jade. But I'm interested to actually see it.
Because it's stabbing at something. Kind of, maybe it's like Cobra, where it's like clumsily stabbing at something. That is kind of real.
The review of the Rotten Tomatoes consensus review is pretty brutal, and a sensible erotic thriller that's neither erotic nor thrilling. One of the unfortunate low points for an aggressively sexual mid-90s cinema. Okay. Apparently Asian art, like Jade, is a main theme in the movie, which I guess William Friedkin collects, different, art from around the world. Like, he has an African art collection, in addition to all his, Eisenstein prints and things like that, in his very old Hollywood home. But, so I guess that... maybe feeds into Jade. There's also Bug. I read the play Bug. I never saw the movie. In fact, weren't we both assigned to read the play Bug in one class or something? But I don't know. But
I feel like I had to read something by Tracy Letts, but I don't know if it was Bug.
I don't even remember that Bug was Tracy Letts. I mean, we probably had to go see August Osage County at one point, which was his big play, which sucks.
It did suck. I think I left in the intermission.
We all did. We both left. Together. But anyway,
What do you want from us?
It was bad. But anyway, so Bug is
the subject,
kind of interesting, I guess. Yeah,
it sounds interesting because it's got that it's got this thing about like a soldier and a girl who are in a motel room in Oklahoma. The whole thing takes place in that, and he's convinced that they're being watched by the U.S. government, and the room is infested with bugs. I assume listening devices, right?
Well, they believe that they're being monitored by either the government or aliens in some.
So they're
way.
targeted individuals. They're basically targeted individuals.
Yeah, they're targeted individuals, right? And it's sort of an ambiguous thing about whether they're targeted individuals or they're actually like just delusional.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we're playing again with the paranoia does shoot through most of his films.
You can see the appeal. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and but then there's so then I think the last two we maybe should mention. One we did before, but these are the two. Well, I guess all three of these are military themed movies that he made, kind of. One right before 9/11, and then two in 2003 and 2006. Bug was the last one, 2006. And then, of course, maybe just, I don't know, working backwards, he actually directed The Hunted in 2003, which I remember it coming out and had no awareness that it was a William Friedkin movie, even to this day. I found out today that it was a William Friedkin movie.
Yeah, it's so many of his movies just can get so easily memory hold. Because it's so interesting when we were conceiving this episode or a series of episodes maybe that it will evolve into. Around just the Exorcist, Sorcerer, and the oddity of the rules of engagement. There's so many other bizarre movies. The Hunted is a very interesting example.
Well, I think when we were on the Cobra episode on Awara, we were talking about the transformation of Rambo, how First Blood was really the most viable movie in terms of being a good film that isn't propaganda. Basically, and that Rambo goes kind of through this alchemical transformation into this juiced up avenger of American glory in Vietnam, et cetera, and kicking communist ass all around the globe. But the first one is really more about the PTSD of this guy and how he's sort of rejected by society and nobody helps him out. His last buddy from Vietnam died of Agent Orange. It definitely has this late Carter vibe to it. So I guess in The Hunted, it sounds like William Friedkin was trying to do something similar, where Benicio del Toro plays U.S. Army Sergeant First Class Aaron Hallam, a former U.S. Army Delta Force operator who spent much of his career performing covert assassinations in service of the government. These missions leave the sensitive and intelligent Hallam conflicted, and it is implied that he was either set up or that the government became dissatisfied with the results of his more recent assignments that result in his current predicament. And I guess he's in the wilderness of Silver Falls State Park in Oregon. He encounters two deer hunters that have expensive scoped rifles. For some reason, he tells them that because of the sophisticated scopes, they are not, quote, true hunters. They pursue him through the woods, but are no match for his skill and use of traps. He eventually kills the pair with his knife. So he's like Rambo, but immediately just starts murdering people for psychotic reasons. And then Tommy Lee Jones is his basically his combat wilderness survival instructor, kind of like his Colonel Troutman, who gets brought in to basically help catch him and bring him in. And I guess the backstory is that Hallam has gone renegade after suffering severe battle stress from his time in the Kosovo War. So he was probably doing some real shady shit. He was probably fighting with alongside Al Qaeda and stuff, I guess then it just kind of, I think it sort of dissolves into a kind of dumb action pursuit thriller. But I think there might be some conspiracy kind of things around the classified ops that he was involved in, and yeah, I guess I never actually saw it, but the FBI is involved, JSOC. It's probably might be one of the first mentions in a movie of the Joint Special Operations Command specifically that became the real tip of the spear in the war on terror. But anyways, I mean, this came out the year that this came out the month that we invaded Iraq.
Yeah.
So weird vibes.
Yeah, the whole device of they're not true hunters, so therefore they must die. Although
again, sounds very Programmed to Kill. It sounds very MK Ultra.
Yes. Yes, it's definitely an interesting sort of take on Rambo. Not as interesting as the idea that we already have copywritten with the Writers Guild of America about Rambo and Bigfoot, or Bigfoot as Rambo or something.
Yes, exactly.
But close. Yeah, so there's definitely like a lot. Yeah, oh, and the one before that, as we did mention, is Rules of Engagement, which is based on a story by Jim Webb, which is itself seems kind of based on Jim Webb's own life, but kind of like, obviously extrapolated into a fantasy. But it does have, to summarize, the movie stars Samuel L. Jackson as this guy. I think Colonel Trilling, I want to say. Let me just confirm that that's correct, because I didn't rewatch it prior to this episode. It's quite a bad... No, it's Terry Childers, so I guess that's where I conflated those two names. But anyway, yeah. So, Childers is played by Samuel L. Jackson. He, basically, the substance of the movie is about how he's sent into Yemen to, evacuate this ambassador, but from, a protest, an anti-American protest is happening at the embassy. Very much like Benghazi.
Yes, very much.
It's a very much Benghazi situation. And so, it's kind of, it's a very brutal scene that, William Friedkin does not shy away from, showing in, full detail. So there's some, gunfire, they seem to be, they're under fire, obviously, but there's this just general mixed crowd of, women and children, etc., etc. Samuel L. Jackson, he won't let his fellow Marines die, so he's just, waste the motherfuckers, and they just, open fire, and they massacre, 83 Yemenis. The whole movie is kind of this, ponderous meditation over whether he was he did anything wrong, or if whether he did the right thing or not, which obviously he didn't, because he murdered a bunch of kids and women who were not armed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's got this kind of Sorkin. I think I saw it.
Yeah,
once.
it's definitely a Sorkin. It does have a Sorkin-y, Few Good Men type vibe. Yeah, there's even it's kind of what if Sorkin took a Cobra potion or something, and he because it's kind of it's the same sort of it's the same sort of opposition of these slimy liberals who one of the best parts is that so there's so the evil guy is named Sokol, and he he's this evil liberal national security advisor, I guess, and he's you gotta court-martial this guy to appease the Arab world, we have to persecute him for a war crime. I'm a liberal,
just
the
like
kind
Monty,
of loser
right?
who is trying to oppress the troops. Yeah, exactly. Just like Monty, aka Scorpio, who has to indict this guy. He is so slimy that it doesn't make any sense. But he actually, there's a tape proving that there's even this really ridiculous scene where the attorney who's defending him, who I guess is his former comrade, as I recall. Yeah, he was wounded, and yeah, this is one of the most Jim Webby parts, because there's a prologue to the movie before any of the main plot takes place. It sort of gives you a sense of Samuel Jackson or Childer's character and his relationship with the guy who becomes his defense attorney, where they're in Vietnam, and Samuel Jackson does what has to be done by just blasting some prisoner of war in the head to intimidate someone, so that they can call off a mortar attack, so that will save the life of Hodges, who eventually becomes the defense attorney. And so that guy becomes the defense attorney, and at one point he, I think, goes on a fact-finding mission to Yemen, and he is sort of interviewing people, and everyone's they find the unarmed crowd, and he sees this girl on crutches, this sad little cute girl, who's injured. And one of the most galling, awful moments of this movie is there's which one assumes this is what will be shown on the tape that the evil guy destroys, which makes absolutely no sense, because if there were a tape proving this, then you could just exonerate him and you wouldn't have to appease the Arab world. Why, it doesn't make any sense. If you could just prove that he did nothing wrong, because literally what is shown is that, like, you know, there's this very, like, memorable shot of this cute little girl, like, literally, like, you know, a 10-year-old pointing, like, you know, Cobra's, like, Jaddy at, like, you know, like, the Marines, like, just blasting away with this, like, cold look on her face, you know, just, like, brutal
It's very,
killer,
like,
you know?
American
like,
Sniper, like, no, little kid,
yeah.
like, stop running at me with that bomb, like, you know.
Yeah, it's, yeah, like, literally, like, the position of the movie is that, like, all of these Yemenis, like, the mothers and the kids, like, they all came out, like, they all had guns, and they all were coming out to, like, kill these Marines. And what Samuel L. Jackson did, like, that's, like, the take. I mean, William Friedkin has said, like, it's ambiguous, you know, I don't know. He said something like, I made this movie because I couldn't decide if, you know, what he did was right or wrong. So I made this movie to find out the answer, you know. But I feel like it just comes off as, like, this very shrill, like, awful propaganda. And, yeah, so, like, depicting, like, this, you know, that really, if the truth were known, if, like, the liberals hadn't destroyed the evidence, then you would see that these so-called innocents, like, they're actually terrorists, too.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Well, to put into context, like, Friedkin's idea that he was, like, trying to go for some ambiguity here, I just want to read from the review you gave me from September 2000 when this came out.
Oh yeah, this is a great review.
It's
from
really great because it basically, you know, it says like, oh wow, this is gonna, you know, this movie is basically propaganda, like brainwashing us to accept a new war in the Middle East. Which is exactly kind of what it is. But yeah, in terms of you know, the moral gray areas of this character, I guess he writes that, like, Childers, Samuel L. Jackson's execution of a Vietnamese soldier during the opening sequence of the film is seen as an acceptable method of getting what he wants. Indeed, the surviving Vietnamese soldier that had witnessed the incident later concedes that Childers acted properly, and in the most risible scene of the film, and there are many, the surviving soldier actually salutes the very man who executed his colleague. This act of admiration and honor suggests, in fact, that although America may have lost the battle in Vietnam, they actually won the moral war, that their tactics and their attitude to combat is ultimately worthy of respect and even praise from the enemy. If you can buy this propaganda, the shocking political and moral heart of sequence after sequence and rules of engagement, then I guess you can believe anything. So yeah, I mean, I don't remember that scene from it, but I kind of want to go back and rewatch it now. But the idea that like a Viet Cong soldier, a North Vietnamese soldier, like flies to America to testify about the guy that shot his like comrade in the head next to him. Is actually like a great man. I would have done the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I would have done the same thing. Like, okay, that I think definitely is Jim Webb writing from experience. Also, you know what else is like maybe one of the even more disturbing things than like William Friedkin directing this is the screenplay was written by Stephen Gaghan. Like who wrote Traffic and Syriana, and then kind of got, it seemed for reasons that are somewhat vague, got kind of blackballed from Hollywood and now was let back to like make the Doolittle movie. To write the Doolittle movie, but like,
awesome.
Yeah, like no, it seemed like a slap in the face, kind of like this is all you get now. You don't get to make any savvy geopolitical thrillers anymore. But it's weird that on the front end that you would think somebody, given the sensibility of his two other scripts that he wrote in the 2000s, that this like would have been completely revolting for him to like adapt Jim Webb's like psychotic story about doing war crimes, and how like awesome it was. Maybe it was his experience in this movie that like made him sussed out. I don't know.
Just to clarify, like in case people want to skip this movie, which I wouldn't necessarily blame them for, the star kind of witness that they bring back at the end is the guy who, you know, the officer who he shot the POW to intimidate. And then, he comes back, and of course there's that, like, very awful scene where, like, they salute each other. And that, like, you know, that actually ties directly into what, Jim Webb's famous thing from the debate in 2016, where they asked, like, you know, who's the enemy that you're proudest to have? And Hillary, you know, famously said, well, in addition to the NRA, the health insurance companies, the drug companies, and the Iranians... and probably the Republicans, you know, and Jim Webb said, I'd have to say the enemy soldier that threw the grenade that wounded me, but he's not around right now to talk to. So I feel like, you know, the idea of, like, the enemy I'm proudest to have, like, kind of this mutual respect or, you know, whatever, that like somehow, you know, like we knew that we would do the same thing. I mean, it's kind of an interesting take on the question, but yeah, I feel like it's a Jim Webb kind of fantasy of like, you know, this respect. The ideological victory was won, I guess.
As the Vietnamese banner would say. At least in Webb's mind, it was won. I just want to read the end here because it is haunting. That you know, early on in the film, again, this is in September 2000. Early on in the film, Childers suggests to Hodges that the army is an empty thing without an enemy, an organization without a purpose. You can't help feeling that this film sets out to create one, to establish an enemy for America's benefit. This is not a film that encourages peace or resolution. It actively constructs conflict and estrangement, identifying a new society to combat, vilifying and demonizing a culture to give the U.S. a purpose, a sense of direction. Because without such a focus, without a target for their enmity and distrust, America is lost and alone, clinging to empty, hollow rules that mean little. In the foul world of rules of engagement, it is the battle of law versus instinct, and instinct must win at every turn. It encourages you to identify an enemy, to trust your fears, indulge in your prejudices, to act on your gut. And once you target an enemy and surrender to instinct, you can act without a shred of guilt or fear of reprisal, and, in the eloquent patriotic words of the heroic Colonel Terry Childers, just, quote, waste the motherfuckers. I mean, did PNAC like executive produce this movie?
Yeah,
because I couldn't think of.
I don't know.
This is part of.
I read that at one point Jim Webb was like upset at like the direction that it was going in, maybe with Stephen Gagan's like rewrites or something on the script, and so he got upset and he tried to like actually get the Pentagon to stop cooperating with the production of the movie, but of course they eventually did cooperate, as they do with all this stuff. So to an extent, the whole thing was like micromanaged by, you know, or at least in some way like managed or handled by so they definitely approved of it. I mean, why wouldn't they? It's completely insane.
And I think you could almost say that you could almost say that this movie forms there might be more films, but at least a kind of troika of like weird predictive programming U.S. military movies that came out in 2000 and 2001. And so I'm thinking of this movie, Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor, and Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down, which both of those, I believe, came out the summer before 9/11 and had so much kind of foresight into what we're about to be sucked back into, even though at the time it didn't seem like there was going to be another Pearl Harbor or Army Rangers were going to be stuck in some urban area in the MENA region, you know, fighting terrorists and warlords and things like that. Or, you know, I mean, the rules of engagement might, in a weird way, be kind of like, at least the thing of it happening would be, kind of feels like a Clinton era, like, oh, there was an embassy thing, and then people opened fire, now it's an international incident, you know, fly Jed Bartlett out there to, you know, assuage the Arab street or something like that. You know, like it felt a little more low stakes, but still all of these are like laying out like sometimes like literally the Cobra mantra, like as long as we play by their bullshit rules, we lose.
Exactly. Their bullshit rules. And it's really, it does like kind of like it feeds back into like I think that review in Senses of Cinema, I think from September 2000 is very astute because it does in a way like feed back into what happened in or you know the opening sequence of The Exorcist, and it's the same type of like gaze that it has over like the many civilians that you see like on you know the sort of the unwashed hordes like in Iraq, you know, that Father Merrin is kind of mingling around, you know, like there's a sense of menace, the sense of you know evil or that sort of and I think that you know William Friedkin, like I think that he has this, you know, maybe another parallel perhaps to Trump, not to, I mean, hopefully we can just get away from mentioning Trump constantly now that he's not going to be president anymore, but maybe not. But, like, he, like, it has this, like, you know, kind of, like you said, maybe, like, sort of paranoid, sort of, like, very fearful, almost, like, childlike kind of, you know, just sense of dread or like apprehension, like around the world, like a double like fascination and fear of like foreign things that, you know, in some way becomes like a prism to express like these boomery anxieties in a way that like sometimes, you know, really hits. and other times, results in the rules of
do
engagement. Maybe that's a resonance with Jim Webb in a way,
It could be, or resonance with other like boomer artists who really spun a lot of, I guess, memorable content, you could say at the very least, from their kind of formative childhood experiences, or the things that they, whether it's like Flash Gordon or watching Citizen Kane for Friedkin, or other things like that. But it almost felt like maybe that most of them kind of got stuck in that adolescent mentality to some degree, which in some ways was like more mature back then, because like people still kind of like grew up faster. So being stuck at like 30 is not necessarily completely infantile, whereas like today just like love Marvel movies or whatever,
right? Yeah,
you know what I mean. But it's like there's like this inability past a certain point to like build upon this like fear. Instead it's just like, I'm just going to stay with this vibe and kind of explore it on the level that I'm kind of comfortable with, and not feel like I have to venture deeper down, this rabbit hole, or build upon it, or be more, I don't know. I mean, mature is kind of like a rickety term to apply to all this, because, art's a little more fuzzy than that. But at the same time, I think there is a kind of like, the edgy, impulsive, like shoot from the hip thing is something that is kind of inherent to the young in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And filmmaking is not necessarily a medium. I would say it's less than something like popular music, or like being a rock star or something like that. I think the complexities of like filmmaking, I mean, I think there's a reason that you don't see like a ton of like 22-year-old like hotshot directors like bursting onto the scene. If somebody's like a 35-year-old director and they burst onto the scene, they're still considered like kind of young, because people go on at their 60s, 70s. It's like golf or something, like you could direct into your 70s or 80s, and while people seem to usually have kind of like a peak period where they make their best work, and then mileage varies beyond that. Like people are still, some filmmakers have gone into interesting phases like later in life, and I guess now we're going to be like, I guess we are seeing that with things like The Irishman, or other, maybe William Friedkin will make another movie, but maybe there's an inability to, I don't know, it's even people that are older than boomers. I don't think it's just about boomers, but about this kind of epoch in our culture and that era of the film industry. Like Francis Ford Coppola seemed to just kind of like he still makes like weird experimental movies every now and then that like never get seen anywhere. But it's like, damn, like, dude, you were an extremely big deal. Or other people just fell by the wayside, where there was like Hal Ashby or Michael Cimino that kind of just like never climb back on the horse again. And then you had people like Friedkin who muddled through, making kind of like weird kind of elevated genre movies that like sometimes worked, and then sometimes like Rules of Engagement were like kind of very cringe and strange in a lot of ways. And now maybe it's irrelevant because they're not only these people that have established big names are going to be able to make anything remotely kind of like original or quirky now, because everyone else is on this like ladder to just like do a franchise movie and like plug into something that already exists and just do like their take of like Deadpool, or their take of like Guardians, or Guardians, the new Baby Yoda spinoff, like anything like that. And there's not as much room to, I don't think Disney would allow like a young Friedkin with like a property like Star Wars to like get as trippy and weird and like liminal with it. Things have to be more clear now and less messy and complex.
There's definitely an impressionistic quality, and also kind of like a wild quality to Friedkin's movies. And I think, in The Leap of Faith, where in the same documentary where he mentioned Stalin killing, 100 Gurlian people or whatever because they were worthless, et cetera, et cetera. Not the one where he praised Hitler, or, where he, talked about how there's some good things about Hitler or whatever, but our assessment of him should not change. He said, that one of the things that interests him the most is the way that dreams can kind of connect people across like vast distances, or that the way that like something that happens in one place, like, maybe, for instance, like, what happens to Father Merrin in Iraq, and then what happens in Washington, like the way that these things can be kind of connected, and the way that, and he related that to even his artistic process, where he said that he feels that there's some other force that guides him in a way to do these things. And, that he doesn't necessarily make these conscious decisions when he's making decisions, like, I think, I forget which one of his movies he did this in. I'm pretty sure it's not The Exorcist, but it starts off black and white, and then it kind of fades into color. I forget which one that is, but, he mentioned doing that, and he said, he didn't make even, like, a conscious decision to do that. It was just something that, sort of, he did, so it's kind of shoot from the hip thing, where it's almost like maybe it's like a kind of channeling in a way, and that can open you open yourself up to different impulses that can go in all sorts of directions, but definitely can be revealing. Like, it actually kind of, what you were saying earlier about the movie, another movie that I hadn't seen, Deal of the Century, involving, like, this sort of UAV, like a drone, basically.
That's so ahead of the curve, man. What the hell?
Yeah, it reminded me of, in this sort of idea of connection across distances, it reminded me of this connection of Pazuzu with the wind, and the traveling on the wind, and the wind as a conveyance of magical power, and whether or good or ill. And there's a very interesting essay that was printed in a book called Sources of Evil. That was the title. The subtitle was something, that actually explains what the book is about, which is like Mesopotamian exorcistic lore. But the essay is called Highway to Hell, The Winds as Cosmic Conveyors in Mesopotamian Incantation Texts. It's by Enrique Jimenez, and he talks about this this sort of aspect of the wind, and he points out how this is something that has exists in more recent traditions as well. Like he mentions a hadith, but kind of reminds me. He talks a lot about the whole idea of untying knots as sort of spells being kind of knots, which is an idea that occurs in the Quran and in Surah Al-Falaq. It talks about it invokes kind of Allah's protection against the evil of those who blow on knots, which is kind of often taken to be witches, but could also be different forces. But there's another very just on the sort of ritual component and the aspect of Pazuzu. There's another essay I remember from that collection. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy with me. But I recall that the last one, I'll see if I can find a quote if I took one down. It's the Grotter type in text as humanistic mappa mundi, which is by Franz Wigerman. And the Grotter type in text, I guess, is a Mesopotamian or Babylonian text, magical or metaphysical text. Just to clarify what it is, it's an Assyrian copy of a Babylonian original recovered from Auteur. Similar texts are known from Nineveh. This is actually very relevant because it's, what it's often thought to be as like descriptions or prescriptions for sculptors to provide the knowledge required to create the correct appearance of a divinity, statue. Because, of course, it's very important. Like I said, these actually are the deities in a way. So to create the correct appearance is very important. So they're guides in that sense. This essay has an interesting take on it because it invokes kind of the quality of the stage or the theatrical or maybe even the filmic in a way, especially like in the sense of imagination. So I'm going to read from a review of this collection, Sources of Evil, Studies in Mesopotamian Exorcistic Lore, because I don't have the actual book, but I would recommend the book because it's an interesting essay collection. But so in particular, Wigerman argues that we should view the text as presenting the deities and their descriptions in three-dimensional space. And this is a quote from Wigerman. The space that accompanied this web of supernatural creatures can be viewed as a temple, and ultimately as a model of the symbolic space in which the beings in question acted out their various symbolic roles, a microcosm. To demonstrate, he provides two diagrams of the temple and the placement of the images within it that demonstrate how the reader might use the Goddard type in text as a guidebook. In essence, the text invites the reader to visualize entering the temple and to identify with the only other human in the tableau, the the baby on Sorcerer's lap, and to see its and your life lined out in front of you. Birth, work, a measure of divine support, inescapable death, and an eternity in the netherworld. He also isolates 2 iconographic themes: the protection of exits and entrances by guardian figures, an audience involving a host, 2 guests, a master of ceremonies, and a banquet. Together, the players and themes define the nature of the stage as a microcosm, and the ultimate subject as a humanistic mappa mundi. So this is, I think, very interesting in light of, like, The Exorcist, basically. This, like, lines up, like, with, you know, the sort of ritual chamber of Reagan's bedroom very well, and shows kind of the, like, the parallels or the analog between this very, very ancient kind of ritual rules or guidelines for you know, idols or temple architecture with the way that, like, these movies are put together. And I think the same forces that, like, are at play in one are in a way at play in the other. You know, but so that's something that I think,
it all lines up.
Yeah, it all lines up. Yeah. Okay. Word. So
I think we're like 2:45 right now.
Really? I thought this was gonna be 2 hours, but I guess that's fine. Okay, then I guess we should wrap up, but we might return to some of these subjects in the future.
A few of these movies, especially there's the sort of predictive programming aspect of some engagement is interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is.
The Deal of the Century as well. I'd really like to see what its portrayal of, like, sketchy arms dealers and South American dictators is like. Maybe when we circle around
I really want to do The Guardian now too. There's a lot of stuff there. Really, even the sequels to The Exorcist, even though they're not Friedkin movies, like, could be interesting. I didn't realize this, but I guess Father Marin was based on Pierre Chardin, and who is, like, an interesting figure in himself, who's kind of ties into some of that, some of the Bigfoot stuff.
I would like to go, because this has been more about Friedkin, you know, the filmmaker and the films themselves. But I would like to kind of explore exorcism in, you know, kind of more, you know, exorcism itself, like, you know, in the Catholic context, like today, because you do see, like, articles pop up every now and then that, you know, it hasn't been totally stopped in the Vatican and around the world, and of course there's all kinds of other religious traditions that have sort of analogs to or forms of exorcism themselves.
Pretty much all of them do. It's just, like, a slight difference in terms of everyone, like, kind of believes in demonic possession because it's basically real. You know, well, I mean, it is real. The question is, like, you know, there are some epistemologists, I guess, that deny its reality, like, but they, I think, still acknowledge, like, at least the reality of it as a phenomenon, whether they disagree about, like, the ontological reality of an external force. Although most people, including myself, do believe in some kind of, like, the question of inside and outside is very complicated, blah, 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 you know, but I do think that, like, you know, when you get into these, like, subtle issues, but, you know, there's something going on, and, you know, it's a very, like, universally held idea, you know, like, jinn possession, like, is what, you know, Muslims widely consider it to be, like, you know, something that's very possible and occurs often, you know. I imagine Jews have their equivalent. Certainly it's something that occurs in, like, traditional paganistic contexts and in various places.
It occurs in Memphis horrorcore.
Right. Sometimes you smoke a blunt of death and, like, exactly. etc.
Or you get on that Ouija board and Satan tells you to kill and you do it.
Right,
and, you know, I mean, these things they're all over the place still in our, you know, in our scientific era.
I feel like the idea of, like, jinn and, like, their possession of people is more than, like, any particular episode. It's, like, you know, one of the ongoing, like, running themes. But doing you know, Catholicism, doing, like, I mean, really even The Exorcist itself could be, like, a whole other thing. It's really hard to criticize episodes, but Pierre Chardin, he was like a very controversial theologian, but he was involved in the whole Peking Man thing. That was like sort of, it's dismissed now, but and the Piltdown Man, I think he also had some kind of connection with. Okay. Or maybe not. I guess it was just the Peking Man, but yeah. And he was a vitalist, I guess. But yeah, that I guess was part of the inspiration for Father Merrin, because he got involved in this sort of archaeology and paleontology. But yeah, that was the only thing I came across just now when I was sort of going through some of that Mesopotamian, some of those Mesopotamian magical texts. I came across a figure called like Lasu or something, the hairy one. Yeah, just saying.
Interesting. Well, yeah.
There.
Put that in the...
One of the monstrous children or demons of Tiamat, the hairy one. Oh my god, it's Sasquatch.
Wow.
Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Just, looking at some depictions.
Yeah.
Anyway. He's out there, but
file that away under
for Bigfoot
B.
2. Yeah, it'll in the B files. Word.
Okay.
But anyway, so we spiraled off in a couple different directions, but I think that we did a good overview, and I think that the general theme of demons and jinn will return, and I think that we can maybe return to even some of these films that we touched on.
We'll see.
Yeah. There were 2 sequels that I guess were big failures. Although maybe the third one less so than the second. The second was everyone hated it, right? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Didn't quite take off.
Yeah. I guess Blatty did the third. He directed it. Yeah.
Oh wow.
All right.
Wow. Okay. Well.
Let's wrap it up.
Yeah. That's that's all for now. I guess. Check out his movies. They're not the most boring thing to watch, even when they don't quite work.
Sorcerer is great. I would definitely recommend Sorcerer to anyone, and it's fairly little known. Yeah.
Extremely recommend Sorcerer. Yeah, and maybe when we get to Contra 9 or something like South America edition, we might have occasion to talk about it again, because, like we said, it sort of hints at this underworld going on down there, and
definitely
very dark
does.
Forces. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah.
But until then,
as always, watch out for jinn.
Once again, watch out for jinn, and also, once again, do not Ouija boards.
Don't play with it. Yeah, if you get contacted by any kind of anyone, especially any entity that has any kind of official title, any kind of military rank, I wouldn't correspond with it necessarily. You don't talk to any captains.
You might think he's Captain Howdy, but he might actually be SS Hauptsturmführer Howdy, and
exactly.
You don't want any of that business at all.
Definitely watch out.
Watch out for them, and just say non 9 to Ouija.
Yeah, exactly. Say 9.
Non 9.
Yes.
Yeah. That's all you got to do.
And,
so.
Yeah.
So. Stay safe out there, everybody, and until next time, stay vigilant.